Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoyed this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Kira stood at the foot of a wide automobile bridge. The sky was frowning, rain was pouring down from it. The girl's long black hair was wet and clinging to her face. But Kira didn't seem to notice it. The cars whizzed by in both directions. Someone honked at the girl, standing so dangerously on the edge of the curb she was splashed by tire spray. Again, she didn't even bat an eye and didn't try to dodge the dirty, cold shower. Kira's attention was fixed on the road where the wedding cortege would soon pass. There was no hope that the festive procession would be delayed until the rain stopped, because Kira saw everything clearly. Trouble would happen, would definitely happen exactly when it was raining, if she didn't get in her way. But Kira would do anything to prevent tragedy from happening. Kira grew up in the village. Her mother and father were already old enough when a swarthy, black-haired girl appeared in the family, so different from her parents and older brothers. Those were blonde, sturdy. Kira, on the other hand, had a frail build. On her face stood out huge, dark brown eyes and black as tar eyebrows apart. Her older brothers were grown up and independent. They lived separately in the city and came to their parents only rarely. Sometimes they brought their families to visit. Their children were just like the rest of the family, ruddy white blondes, chubby, with strong knees. Of course, Kira noticed that they were different from her own, but somehow she didn't think about it. It's not a big deal, the ginger cat also once had black kittens. But as she grew up, the girl understood and realized more and more clearly. She was too different from her relatives. And it was not only in appearance. Her parents were economical working people. All their time, all their thoughts were occupied with cleaning, cooking, gardening, housework, and yard work. Conversations revolved around these topics. Kira was interested in people, how they felt, why they acted this way and not that way. She asked her mother and father 100 questions a minute. They only waved away their inquisitive daughter and advised her to stop doing silly things. "Better the cucumbers are gone," frowned the father. "Or mop the floors in the house," her mother said. No, Kira was not a stranger to helping her parents with household chores. In her small childish hands, any business could be done, but it was not all that interested her in life. Parents did not understand their daughter. But she was perfectly understood by a woman swarthy, beautiful, young, with black, very kind eyes. It was a pity only that she lived only in Kira's dreams. For as long as the girl could remember, this woman had always dreamed of her. She did not say anything, but looked with such tenderness and love that Kira's heart immediately became warm and light. The girl often shared with her her troubles, worries, and immediately felt relieved, because this beautiful woman understood and accepted her every word. Kira knew this for sure. It was a pity that the stranger herself never said anything, but looked with such sympathy and understanding that words were not required. So Kira was not too interested in housekeeping and household chores and worries. She was drawn to the forest, to nature. She subtly felt people, their moods, thoughts, intentions. This was not the only difference between the girl and her relatives and other villagers. Kira, she could see the troubles that threatened a person, and also the little girl unmistakably determined where and what someone hurts or will soon be sick. By the age of 7, the girl realized this ability. At first, she was not surprised. She thought that everyone could do that. Then she realized, of course, her differentness, uniqueness, but much later. "Don't drink whiskey before the flight, you'll fly into the ditch," said once little Kira to Uncle Jacob, a neighbor. She had just seen what was going to happen to him when she happened to look into his eyes, saw it, and was horrified. Overturned, and soon no longer a car in a ditch, but her neighbor's body stretched out in an unnatural pose. Blood. A gruesome picture, but it could have been easily avoided. The girl had kindly warned the man. Instead of the expected gratitude, Kira got an angry rebuke. "You're still going to teach me?" Uncle Jacob hissed angrily, looking at the little neighbor with almost hatred. "I'm not old enough. My wife scolds me, her friends nag me, and now you. Well, get out of here before you get your ass kicked." Frightened, Kira obediently slipped out of the neighbor's yard. He really could use physical force. He beat his sons like that. The whole street could hear them screaming. Kira felt sorry for Sam and Andy. They were her close friends. The kids had grown up together. But their parents said Uncle Jacob was doing the right thing to keep them on their toes. Kira was never touched by her mother or father. Well, she tried not to give her parents any reason to. So they didn't have a very warm relationship. Uncle Jacob did crash into a ditch and die. At the funeral, people were talking about the man's own fault. Drunk driving again. And he'd been warned many times. He'd been told. So Kira decided, having listened to the neighbors' conversations, that everyone knows how to see the danger that threatens a man. She wasn't the only one who'd warned Uncle Jacob. People had said so themselves. "Mom, Dad, I warned Uncle Jake too," she shared with her parents. "I knew this would happen too. Why didn't he listen to people?" "Don't say anything," the father glared at his daughter angrily. "People have grief, and you're still here with your reasoning." Kira saw the small troubles that could happen to people and tried to warn them. It was natural for her, even became a habit over time. For example, she timely wiped the puddle on the floor from under the refrigerator, and the mother did not slip and did not break her leg. Also, the girl detained the neighbor's little girl Isabel in her yard, just distracted her with toys. Otherwise, the girl would have run for the gate and been bitten by a dog off the chain. That would have scared her almost to death. She wouldn't talk for a long time afterwards. There were a lot of cases like that. I can't remember them all. But at the age of 12, Kira clearly realized that she had a special gift. Other people can't see the future, and they're certainly afraid of Kira's ability. So it's best to keep quiet about her. Kira was coming back from school when she saw Trixie. The girl lived with her parents on the other side of the village. She often came here to visit her friend Lydia. Trixie was not well liked in the village. "She's a slut," they said about the girl with disdain, and some with outright dislike. Kira did not know the meaning of the word at that time. "What do you mean, a slut?" Here she herself also liked to go out. She often played with children in the street, and she herself could wander around the village for hours. Kira liked forests and fields, liked roads. The girl generally dreamed of growing up soon and going around the world on foot or hitchhiking. In general, the girl did not understand why walking it's bad. And she always greeted Trixie with a friendly hello, and she often smiled at Kira. "Hello. Wait. Hello, Gypsy Beauty." Kira was often called a gypsy because of her appearance, but Trixie pronounced the word in a kind of affectionate and cheerful way. It didn't sound like a hurtful nickname from her lips. Anyway, Trixie was expecting a child, a boy. Kira had seen it long ago, but hadn't voiced her thoughts because she thought Trixie knew it, and so did everyone else. The girl had seen her ability as something natural and ordinary. She thought everyone could do it. The neighbors were saying that Trixie, who was walking around, had made a baby, that no one would want her now. They spoke of her future baby as something shameful and dirty. Again, Kira was perplexed. A child is happiness, joy, light. How could one talk about a baby like that? And why didn't anyone want Trixie now? Her baby is wonderful, cute, sweet. Kira could see that clearly. On the contrary, everyone would want Trixie even more with a belly like that. That memorable day, Trixie stood leaning against the fence of the house where her girlfriend lived, smoking. I think she was still drunk. At least she smelled strong. Before she'd gotten pregnant, Trixie had often drank and smoked, but she'd abstained because of the baby. But today, for some reason, she snapped. Maybe it wasn't just tonight. It looked like Trixie had been like this for days. Kira approached her and froze. She saw that the baby in Trixie's belly was choking. He was no longer smiling, no longer happy, no longer waiting in joyful anticipation of meeting a huge and interesting world. This little guy is clinging to life with all his might. Trixie's poisoning him right now. How? Why? Can't Trixie see her own son suffering? Trixie, stop it, Kira pleaded, looking into Trixie's cloudy, reddened eyes. What are you doing? The woman wondered. Throw the cigarette away. Your baby's choking. Another moralist, the mother-to-be rolled her eyes languidly. Why don't you go about your business? I've got plenty of educators already. Your nose isn't old enough to be smart. But Kira couldn't leave. Who would help the baby then? The girl first persuaded Trixie to give up her cigarette. She lazily waved it away. Then Kira, realizing that words would have no effect, snatched the cigarette right out of the unsuspecting Trixie's hands and threw it into the grass. That's enough. Your baby is suffocating. He's dying. You need to go to the hospital. You little shit. Trixie couldn't help herself, slapping Kira with a resounding slap. What the hell are you doing? Kira's cheek was burning with fire, but she continued to coax Trixie. Your baby's not well. I can see that. You love him, don't you? I know, Trixie. Go to the doctor as soon as possible. Give me a break, Trixie yelled. She had completely lost her temper by now. Get out of here, Trixie hissed. The baby is dying. Please go to the doctor. He's going to die soon, isn't he? Kira sobbed, smearing tears on her face. Trixie spun Kira around by her shoulders and pushed her roughly in the back. Just then, Amelia, Trixie's girlfriend, appeared on the porch. What do you have here? She asked in surprise. Oh, Kira's putting on a show. Come on, let's go, or we'll be late for the movie. And the girls, chatting about something, wandered towards the local movie theater. Kira knew that today they were showing some comedy not for children. The girl followed Amelia and Trixie all the way to the movie theater, begging, pleading, crying. The girls laughed at her in the company of her friend. Trixie no longer behaved aggressively. Kira's behavior suddenly amused her. Trixie was having fun while the baby inside her suffered unbearably. Kira could do nothing, absolutely nothing to help it. She simply didn't have the strength to drag the adult Trixie to the hospital. And that made the girl's soul ache. At home, she immediately rushed to her room, fell face down on her bed, and burst into tears. Parents did not bother the girl, did not prevent her from crying her feelings simply because they did not care. She didn't bother them, so be it. They treated their older sons quite differently. They asked about their affairs and life in the city with interest. They tried to please them in everything, smiled warmly, and, most importantly, looked at them with such tenderness and love that Kira had never seen in their eyes towards herself. Only she looked at her like that. That woman who comes in dreams. And today she was dreaming. After all, Kira needs someone's support, even if it is this wonderful woman who lives only in her dreams. It was that day that Kira realized a thing that struck her to the core. Trixie simply didn't see what was happening to her baby. She's a kind person, after all. Trixie, even though she sometimes gets angry and swears. And so does Amelia. She looked at her friend and didn't see the danger to her baby. So they both saw nothing, and neither did the others. Kira began to ponder, remembering some incidents from her life, and came to a stunning conclusion. She has a unique ability. She is very different from the others. The others simply do not see, do not understand what is available to her, Kira. This information was still to be digested, and to understand what to do with all this further. A week later, when Kira was doing her homework in her room, her furious mother burst in on her. "What on earth are you doing?" she exclaimed. The woman's eyes burned with angry fire. She resolutely approached her daughter, grabbed her by her thick braid, yanked her from her chair. The girl fell straight to the floor. This had never happened before. Kira had tears spurting from her eyes. It was too painful and unexpected. Her parents had never laid a finger on her before. What on earth was going on? What had she done to deserve this outburst of rage from her mother? It soon became clearer. And why did Trixie curse the child? Answer me. I didn't, Kira sobbed. How didn't you? There are plenty of witnesses, both Amelia, Trixie's friend, heard, and the neighbor Grandma Mary. She was out in the yard fiddling at the time. People say you wished Trixie bad for that kid, and now he's dead. She's such a trashy blabbermouth. I just wanted to warn her that the baby wasn't well, that she needed to go to the hospital, Kira tried to explain. He was suffocating in her stomach. How would you know, you gypsy brat? What Kira slammed her eyes shut. She was jokingly called a gypsy by many in the village. But her parents didn't like it, and they never said that about their daughter. So Kira took her mother's words very seriously. It would be better, really, if we hadn't taken you. Why such problems in your old age? Yes, I felt sorry for the tiny girl, abandoned. Karina, from the abundance of information and overwhelming emotions, lost consciousness, just blacked out. She came to herself on her bed. Her mother and father were sitting next to her. Both of them looked worried about her, about Kira. It was even pleasant, a little. But then the memories came over the girl and she felt defenseless and alone in the world again. Am I not your own daughter? Kira first inquired. Am I really a gypsy or something? Her mother silently shifted her gaze to the wall. Her father shook his head slowly. We were going to tell you that later when you're older. Mother, you see, couldn't help herself. She was scared. Scared here. When the girl you've raised since she was a baby says such scary things to people. I wanted to warn Trixie, Kira tried to explain. She wouldn't listen to me. And you took me from the orphanage. Is that how it works? You weren't taken to an orphanage by your own blood relatives. Her mother pursed her lips dismissively. It was evident that the mention of Kira's relatives displeased her. They abandoned the newborn right in the field. Just like that, a defenseless infant in some dirty rags. They didn't need you there. They got rid of you. They probably thought you'd die alone in the field. Why die? At once the girl did not want to believe such terrible things. Clearly no one loved you there. The father entered the conversation. They left you in the middle of a field at night, away from people. Obviously the calculation was that you would either freeze or starve to death. What's it like out there? It's wild. No one can hear you if you shout or scream, unless a beast comes out of the forest. You've been abandoned, the mother confirmed. I found out later that gypsy girls are not particularly valued, so they got rid of the burden. They just threw them away like they didn't need them. They're wild, uneducated people, and it's a common thing for them. And you seem to have been born under a lucky star. Father spoke again. I was riding through that field that day, riding a new stallion, bold. He smelled you. He roared and kicked his hooves. I thought at first a wolf must have run by recently. That's why the horse got worried. No, the bold one led me straight to you. A very unreal picture appeared to the eyes of the astonished man, a baby lying in the grass, wrapped in dirty scraps of cloth. It was obvious that the baby had been here for a long time. The baby did not even have the strength to scream. Later it turned out that the infant had blown his voice to a hoarse pitch. Of course, the man picked up the baby and quickly rushed home. His wife took in the crumb, carefully nursed him. She had long dreamed of grandchildren. The sons grew up and moved away. They were all building careers. They didn't think about children yet. But their mother missed the babies so much. She unwrapped the baby and shrieked with joy. It was a girl, and the woman had always wanted a daughter. She gave birth to 3 sons, each time hoping for a miracle. But no, she and her husband only had boys. And suddenly she had such a pretty little girl. "Shall we keep it?" she tentatively suggested to her husband. He was against it at first, but the wife was able to persuade, and the influence on her husband had a great deal. So the little girl remained in the family of the man who found her in the field and saved her from certain death. The spouses formalized the adoption, and as it should be, the documents were in order. They named the girl Kira. Of course, the adoptive mother, once dreaming of a daughter, thought up for her quite different names, especially like Megan and DG, but for the swarthy girl needed something else. She didn't look like Megan, and she didn't look like DG either. And so the girl became Kira. She was swarthy, black, and had a spot on her shoulder in the shape of Africa. What a Megan, her mother couldn't help smiling. Kira looked at her birthmark for some reason. Indeed, its outline was very similar to the African continent. The girl was embarrassed by this birthmark and tried to hide it from people's eyes. "People discouraged us," of course, continued the father. "They judged us, saying, 'Why do you need a gypsy child?' They warned us that genes are a strong thing. But we thought, what difference does it make who gave birth to the child? The main thing is who raised the child and how. We thought you'd be our helper, a good, sweet girl, like Hannah or Isabel. Genes, it turns out, mean more than upbringing." Mother shook her head sorrowfully. "You're a wild one. What kind of a fool are you growing up to be? Just now you're doing well in your studies. That's where you're good. And the rest. Why do you have to say such horrible things?" Trixie said that I know it's just a coincidence. "Well, you couldn't help yourself. You said something you didn't mean. I didn't know your words had that kind of power. Coincidence. Only her baby really did die in the womb. They'll think you're a peeping Tom, and they'll blame you. A lot of people in the village know you're from a Tabor, so how can we live? How can my father and I face people now?" Kira wanted to object. She wanted to explain to her parents that she saw how hard it was for the baby in her belly. That's why she tried to warn them. But suddenly the girl clearly realized that it is not worth it. She will not be understood. She is different, alien. And it's not even that Kira is not related by blood to her father and mother. The girl for the first time clearly realized she has a unique gift, and other people, they can't do that. And Kira's ability scares them. And that's why you have to keep your mouth shut. Keep quiet, keep your head down. Otherwise you'll get in trouble. Recognition of parents, reaction of people, all this forced Kira to become more secretive and mature. Now she was often in her own thoughts, looked outwardly withdrawn and aloof. Neighbors since then squinted at the girl with distrust and even forbade their children to communicate with her. Kira was not particularly upset by this. She used to love to walk alone in the woods and fields, and now she was always disappearing somewhere. There, among birches and pines, it was much easier and more pleasant for her than among people. The gap between her and the others was growing wider and wider. Well, at least now it was clear why her own parents treated her so badly. She was just a stranger to them. They wanted an obedient assistant. They took an abandoned gypsy girl. She wasn't what they wanted. A disappointment. I feel a little sorry for them. Time passed. Kira graduated from high school. She got straight A's on her diploma. Teachers advised the girl to try to go to college in the city. She gladly agreed, because Kira saw the sick places of people. A medic, she could become just wonderful. Yes, and she liked to help others, to alleviate their suffering. She also wanted to leave the village as soon as possible. Everyone here was wary of her. Even her parents were distant. Kira thought that they had regretted their decision to take the gypsy girl more than once, but they were too responsible and conscientious people to get rid of their adopted daughter and give her to an orphanage. So everyone was relieved when Kira finally left her father's home. In the city, the girl from the village was given a room in a dormitory. It was hard, of course, to get used to a new life. But it was also interesting. Nobody knew Kira here in the city. People around her were friendly, without any prejudice. But Kira herself was smarter now. She kept silent about her gift and discreetly warned the small troubles that were to happen to her new friends. Kira went to school, got her diploma, but she couldn't find a job in her specialty. Employers wanted experience. And where would a college student from yesterday get that? Kira sat at the train station waiting for her train. She was ready to cry with despair. She needs to return home to the village, where she is not loved and not expected, to the place from which she escaped a few years ago to a happy, as it seemed to her, life. But the girl had no way out. She never got a job. She had nowhere to live. She couldn't even buy food. They stopped paying her scholarship a long time ago. So she's been scraping by on odd jobs lately so she doesn't starve to death. She scrubbed floors somewhere or washed dishes in a restaurant. She couldn't get any other jobs. You had to have goodwill everywhere, even to work as a waitress in a bar. So Kira came home. At least there was a roof over her head. And her mother said there were vacancies on the farm. Kira, who dreamed of treating people, would have to work as a milkmaid. Was it worth it to study in the city for so many years? But where to go? The worst of all was alienation. People were still afraid of her and shunned her. And her parents were not thrilled with the news that her adopted daughter was coming home. They didn't even hide it particularly. Kira sat on a suitcase right on the platform, because all the benches and benches were long occupied. It's summer. People are in a hurry to go on vacation. Two girls a little older than her approached her. One of them, a little embarrassed, said in a quiet, shy voice, "And you are a gypsy. Tell me a fortune. I'll pay." Kira was taken aback. In the village, her gift was considered a curse, and she herself was treated warily. This girl, on the contrary, was willing to pay to find out the truth about herself. Kira needed money. She spent her savings on the ticket, barely scraping together the necessary amount. If the girl paid, Kira would at least buy a bun and coffee at the local cafeteria. The thought of fresh pastries made her mouth fill with saliva, so she agreed. "Yes, I'm a gypsy." Kira smiled at the girls. "What would you like to know?" "When am I getting married?" the girl asked. Her eyes burned with curiosity at that. "Do you need to see my palm?" No, Kira smiled. She didn't need a palm. Much more informative were the eyes of the interlocutor. It was through them that she most often learned the truth about people. Well, or their favorite things that people had recently touched. "No, I can't say that," Kira replied. "It depends on a lot of factors, a lot of variations of events. But what I can say for sure is that your tooth is going to hurt soon, and very badly. Even pills won't help. Are you going anywhere right now?" "Not now," the girl answered confusedly. "We just came to get our tickets, and we're leaving tomorrow." "Then I strongly advise you to see a doctor as soon as possible. Otherwise the trip will turn out to be a torment," Kira replied. She thought that the girl would not like her prediction, because she had asked her about something else. But the girl suddenly smiled, thanked her, and handed Kira a crisp bill which could be used not only for a bun and coffee, but also for something more serious. A full meal at a cafe, for example. "No way, that's too much," Kira marveled. "Some gypsy, you are wrong." Only the girls moved away from Kira as a pregnant woman immediately jumped up to her. "I saw you told the girl's fortune. Can you help me?" "Depends on what you're interested in." Kira stretched out in surprise. What a rush. "Tell me, please, can you see who I'm expecting? A boy or a girl?" Kira smiled. "Of course I can see it. You have both a boy and a girl in there," Kira replied. "Didn't you know you were carrying twins?" The woman smiled and immediately slipped a bill into Kira's hand. "Is this much enough?" "Of course I knew. It was just a test to see if you were a real fortune teller or a charlatan." "Just don't take offense." "Okay," Kira wasn't offended. On the contrary, she was amused by the woman's cunning. "What I want to know is this. Is my husband cheating on me?" the woman asked. Kira looked more closely at her interlocutor. She was anxiously waiting for an answer. She was rubbing the strap of her bag with her fingers, shifting from foot to foot. Of course, Kira could not see whether this future mother of twins was faithful to her husband. But she did notice something dangerous, a darkening in the heart area. "I don't know about the husband, sorry, but you should definitely see a cardiologist. There's something wrong with your heart. Don't freak out. It might not be anything serious, but it's worth getting checked out," Kira said. "Thank you." The woman clearly took Kira's words seriously. "I'll definitely go now. Do you see anything about your husband at all?" "No, but your kids are healthy, and the road will be safe and easy for you. That's all I can say for now." The woman nodded, paid Kira, and left. After that, people who had been attracted by the previous clients still came to her. Kira sent some to the doctor, seeing their health problems. Some were advised not to hurry with their trip, as there was trouble waiting for them on the road. The gift that so frightened everyone in her village was considered a boon here. People said nice words to Kira, paid her money. By the time the train arrived, she had enough money to rent an apartment for a whole month. The train was boarding, and Kira still did not hurry to the aisle. She sat on the platform and thought maybe she shouldn't go to the village. She had made a lot of money today in just an hour. Of course, it would not always be so lucky, but it's definitely enough to live on. And there is no need to return to a place where you are not loved, even feared, where you are accused of all the deadly sins and considered a gypsy brat. It's very unpleasant to feel like some kind of walking bad omen. People don't want to make eye contact. They say hello through their teeth. She's better off staying in town. Help people. For now. And then maybe she'll get a job in a hospital specialty. So Kira stayed. A few years passed. Kira, as she had once dreamed, worked as a nurse in the hospital. Patients loved her for her cheerful disposition and light hand. In the mornings, the queue for injections lined up just to her. "All clients from us repel," joked the other nurses. And doctors also listened to Kira. The hospital was already legendary for her intuition. "So what a gut you have," Jacob, the head of the department, marveled. "You should go to the academy." "You should. You'll make a great doctor." But Kira didn't rule out that possibility. But she didn't want to be away from her patients, even for the sake of her studies. She was afraid that they wouldn't be able to help anyone here without her. Still, Kira had a rare gift. It had to be put to good use. She still dreamed of a gray-haired woman with kind black eyes. True, now it happened less often than in her childhood. After every such dream, Kira got up feeling energized and full of strength. This woman seemed to energize her, encourage her. And Kira got used to her and missed her if she didn't show up for a long time. But she always knew that time would pass and she would come again and she wouldn't go anywhere. It was just a pity that the woman didn't speak. Kira would have liked to ask her a lot of questions, but Kira herself couldn't tell her anything in these dreams. Or rather, she said so, but she saw that her words could not be heard by the woman. The girl understood. These were not just dreams, it was something more. And what? Perhaps someone from her Tabor could explain it to her. But where to find them now? And is it necessary? The gypsies had left her in the middle of the field, hoping she would die. Kira no longer worked as a fortune teller. It helped her stay afloat in the city until she found a job. But fortune telling took a lot of time and energy. And people were different. Some listened to what she said, some laughed at it. For some it was all just entertainment, but Kira still managed to prevent several serious tragedies. Once she noticed a stroke in a woman traveling with 2 small children and called her an ambulance right at the station. It's scary to think what would have happened if everything had happened on the road. The young woman would not have been saved, and her children would have remained orphans. After all, the mother raised them alone. Another time, Kira strictly forbade a teenage girl to get into a hitchhiker because she saw her future. If that had happened, the girl would never have been found. It was good that this young person could not see what appeared before Kira's mental gaze. A frightening, simply terrifying picture, but a superficial description was enough for the girl. Kira herself called her an official cab and did not even take money for the fortune-telling. She offered the girl to pay for the ride on a trusted transportation. And the girl only wanted to know if Trixie would get into theater school or fail. Kira couldn't tell her that, but she could see the dreadful and imminent trouble that was about to befall her by barely touching her sleeve. Kira often grew tired of this gift of hers of seeing other people's fates, sometimes hard, sometimes tragic, and not being able to save the person in most cases. It's hard. It's impossible to get used to. That's why Kira tried not to look people in the eye or touch their things unnecessarily. Otherwise, emotional exhaustion is inevitable. Gradually, year after year, Kira learned to treat her gift in such a way that it would not harm her. It happened on a Saturday morning. For some reason, Kira couldn't sleep for a long time, although she had stayed up late the night before with her friends at the bar. The girl thought that she would lie in bed until at least lunchtime. But no, some unknown force tore her from her pillow and drove her outside. It happened sometimes. And it almost always ended up with Kira pulling someone out of serious trouble. As was always the case in these situations, the African-shaped birthmark on her shoulder hurt a little. The very one that the girl didn't like to show for some reason. Kira sighed and put on a long light sundress. It was summer. She didn't put her hair up. She went with her hair down. There was no time. It was fine as it was. The weather was not suitable for a walk. The sky was gloomy. It was going to start raining soon, maybe even a downpour. Kira hadn't brought an umbrella, not to go back home to get it. There was no time for that. The force continued to drive the girl forward. Kira realized she had to hurry. It was useless to argue with the invisible force. Sometimes Kira tried to resist it, but it didn't work. In the end, she still broke away from her seat, dropped all the things she tried to distract herself with, and ran away to the silent, but very strong call. Sometimes the girl wondered what it was. Maybe she was being used for her own purposes by fate itself. I wonder if there are still such people on Earth. I wish I could meet a colleague with a gift. There weren't many people on the streets. It was a Saturday morning. The weather was overcast. Rare passers-by met on the girl's way. They threw interested glances at Kira and quickly averted their eyes. The girl realized that she looked very exotic. The appearance of a gypsy, loose black hair, and a floor-length sundress. A kind of gypsy girl from the movie. Some outfits and hairstyles emphasized the unusual appearance of Kira. That's why she preferred jeans and t-shirts in everyday life, not to stand out. But today it turned out to dress like this, apparently this mysterious force, and Kira did not always have time to think about their actions. And now she had jumped out of the house and the first thing that came to hand. Kira walked through the park. In the distance, she could already hear the muffled rumblings of thunder. Great. I didn't want to get caught in a summer thunderstorm. It began to drizzle from the sky. It was still a weak rain which could be ignored. It felt fresh right away. It was even easier to breathe. It smelled of wet leaves of asphalt. The girl breathed the full breath. She wanted to stop and look around. She loved nature in the rain. And here in the park was so beautiful, but it was impossible to argue with the force. And now the girl hurried onward with a confident step. At such moments, Kira did not feel tired and did not feel time. The girl noted that she had already left the city center behind. While it usually took at least 20 minutes to get there by bus, in a normal state, Kira would have collapsed from fatigue. So many kilometers on her feet, but not now. And now, finally, Kira reached the square in front of the city registry office. The asphalt was already strewn with rose petals. Probably several registrations had already taken place here since morning. The parking lot was crowded with cars, many of them decorated with ribbons and balloons. Typical wedding corteges. Here and there stood groups of tense and cheerful people, all understandable guests and relatives of the newlyweds. They were talking, laughing, drinking. There was a sense of celebration everywhere. Kira, too, was imbued with it for a moment. She almost forgot why she was here. Someday Kira would have it too, a white dress, a handsome fiancé, and then a cozy family life, children. The girl dreamed of it, wanted family happiness. The force no longer drove her forward. Perhaps she should help someone here. But who? Kira, looking around, searched for that very person. She recognizes him or her by the look in his eyes. It's like a flash. Suddenly, Kira's attention was drawn to a beautiful bouquet, obviously from an expensive flower store. It was lying alone, somehow unnoticed by anyone, not far from the parking lot. Stylish, delicate, tied with a narrow satin ribbon of pale pink color. Kira suddenly realized that she really wanted to hold it in her hands. There was an irresistible desire to take the bouquet, to pick it up. It was hard to watch such beauty lying on the asphalt. The girl approached the bouquet, bent down, and only Kira touched it. As in her eyes, bright flashes began to flash pictures one after another, as in a diaphragm. More often than not, the future and the past came to her like that. Kira watched carefully, trying not to miss anything. The happy newlyweds descended from the porch of the registry office, accompanied by their dressed-up guests. The bride is simply charming. Long blonde curls are crowned with a graceful tiara. A wedding dress in Greek style beautifully encircles a slender figure. The groom leads her by the right hand. In the left hand of the girl clutched the very bouquet that will soon be on the asphalt. So again a flash, a change of picture. The bride sits in a car decorated with balloons and flowers. The groom gallantly opens the door in front of her, intending, apparently, to sit down next. At this time, the bouquet falls out of the girl's hand. In the turmoil, she simply does not notice it. Next picture. The wedding cortege moves away, and the bouquet remains alone, lying next to the parking lot, unnoticed by anyone. Kira realized the young people and their guests had gone to take pictures at the memorable places of the city. It was a long tradition of local newlyweds to visit familiar, but very beautiful locations. But the visions did not end there. Now they were in less vivid color. The muted hues were a sign that Kira was seeing the future. Something that hasn't happened yet, but will happen if she doesn't intervene. A terrible picture appeared before her eyes, truly terrible. A wide highway bridge. Kira recognized the place. The cars from the motorcade were parked along the sides, so they were still decorated with ribbons and flowers. But the guests getting out of their cars are no longer smiling. There is confusion and fear on their faces. Some are as pale as a sheet. Some are sobbing. They look in the same direction. And the sky is gloomy, almost autumnal, pouring heavy rain, even lightning flashes somewhere in the distance. And it seems impossible to make out anything specific in the picture. But Kira realized at once something terrible had happened, and soon she would realize what it was. A change of frame. And now Kira sees a car, the same car in which the groom recently put the bride. But it's hard to recognize it now. It's so disfigured. A little farther away you can see the culprit of the terrible accident. It was a huge truck. After the Kamaz flew out on the oncoming road and collided with the car of the bride and groom, it crashed into a pole. The driver got out of the cab, squatted down next to the wheel, and covered his face with both hands. He must have realized by now what he had done. And again the picture changed. Now the damaged car appeared before Kira close up, and the girl could not refrain from screaming. She saw the bride, Urusarusamalik and Pay smile in the car. She lay on the pavement, her neck unnaturally twisted, her beautiful white dress bloodied. Nearby, the groom pressed against the chest of the mangled metal. In his eyes understanding, pain, unbearable suffering. The guy smashed his head and probably broke his arm. but he is alive and will live. But his beloved will not return. And the realization of this fact presses him to the ground. And all around him are the guests. Some woman, probably the mother of the unfortunate girl, is devoid of feelings. She is supported on both sides. So much pain, so much fear. Kira's heart clenched with horror. The girl blinked. The vision vanished. Kira looked at the bouquet in her hands. Is this the misfortune she must prevent? That's what the unknown force had gotten her out of bed so early for. Kira didn't know why this force protects some and is completely indifferent to others. Perhaps there are cases of predestination. They have long been written into the history of the world, and there are no options. But sometimes fate gives people a chance, and then Kira becomes a kind of instrument guide. At least that's how the girl explained it all to herself. Kira hurried to that very automobile bridge. She knew that she had time, but not much. There was no need to delay after all. It had started to rain. The light drizzle that had caught Kira in the park had turned into a full-blown downpour. Lightning flashes cut through the sky from time to time. Kira was quickly soaked to the skin. Her long hair clung to her face. Her sundress, weighed down by the water, made it hard to walk. She probably didn't look her best. Perhaps no one would listen to her. They'd think she was crazy or begging. But Kira she must at least try to prevent a tragedy. The beautiful blonde girl with the sweet smile should stay alive. She can have wonderful, beautiful children. She can bring much more goodness and happiness to this world, just as long as she makes it. And there it is, that bridge. It's pouring from the sky, just like in Kira's recent visions. The girl stood by the side of the road, at the foot of the bridge. She gazed carefully into the distance. Soon, very soon, the wedding cortege would appear, and the moment of truth would come. Kira must save the bride. She had to. Finally, she caught a glimpse of it, a fancy car. The bride and groom were in it. Behind them came a tail of decorated cars. Kira recognized them. She had seen it all before, though she had never met them before. The cortege was getting closer and closer, and now the first car was entering the bridge. Kira jumped out in front, left the safety of the curb, and found herself right in the roadway, in the path of the car. Brakes squealed. The young man driver, probably a friend of the groom, rolled down his window and began to shower Kira with curses. Behind his back, the girl saw the faces of the bride and groom. They were smiling. That was the mood. Kira couldn't help but smile too, despite the seriousness of the situation. "Oh, you're completely nuts, you girl. Get out of here now," shouted the driver, but Kira didn't leave. It was too early to leave. She held up the motorcade. The guests stopped too, waiting for the situation to be resolved. But this delay was too short-term. It would not change anything drastically. Some of the guests were already rushing to Kira. Two men in smart shirts and with faces twisted with rage. Kira had no doubt that they would try to get her out of the way by force. Well, let them try. So they won't succeed. Kira was being controlled by a far more powerful force than these two. They won't move her, though it would probably be unpleasant, of course. The men grabbed Kira by the arms and dragged her toward the curb. The girl struggled and fought back with her whole body, growled and screamed, tried to bite the men's hands. They looked at each other in surprise. Both of them were of strong build and could not understand why suddenly they could not get the fragile girl out of the way. The battle lasted for about 15 to 20 seconds. And then Kira saw a truck, the same one, rushing past them at full speed. It flew straight into the oncoming traffic. Fortunately, there were no other cars on the way, and the driver had time to swerve. And if it hadn't been for Kira, the truck might have hit the car with the bride and groom, except that no one realized or noticed it. And Kira didn't need fame and recognition. The main thing is that the bride is alive and well. As soon as the truck passed the bridge, the girl calmly let herself be led away from the road. "You wretched tramp," angrily threw to Kira one of the men. He was completely soaked in the rain and rightly blamed Kira for it. She only smiled. She was not used to hearing such insults. The main thing is that the bride is out of danger now. She will live, she will be happy. A happy future awaits the newlyweds. They really love each other. You can see it in their eyes clearly. That means everything will be fine. The guests settled into their cars and the motorcade resumed driving. And only then Kira noticed him, a handsome, swarthy man with kind black eyes. His face somehow seemed very pleasant and vaguely familiar. It was one of the guests. He wore a dress shirt of a soft lavender color, and his shoes were polished to a shine. He was obviously going to a banquet. Only his car, parked at the curb, was not decorated with balloons. But there were many such cars in the motorcade. Not everyone likes to dress up their transportation. The man slowly began to approach Kira. He looked carefully and with interest into her face. And he didn't care at all about the rain. It was as if this man did not notice that he was soaked to the skin. Kira thought that one of the guests had decided to stay to punish her for the delay, but she immediately dismissed the thought. The man's eyes were too kind. "Well, hello, beautiful," spoke the man, addressing Kira. "Don't be afraid of me." "I'm not afraid." "I know if you are. I think you see a great deal ahead, and that's why you don't have much fear." Kira felt as if struck by lightning. Does he know about her gift? Or guesses what was even going on here right now? "I figured it out," the man continued. "I saw that truck. If he hadn't stopped the cars, the bride and groom's car would have been damaged, and someone would have been killed. The newlyweds. Just the bride. But the groom wouldn't have been able to live afterward either," Kira replied. "Would have blamed himself, and would have fallen seriously ill soon afterward. And now they're both alive and happy," Kira's interlocutor summarized. "I should probably introduce myself. My name is Timmy." "Kira," the girl replied. "Kira is a beautiful name and it suits you. Listen, it's raining like this. We're soaking wet. You're soaking wet. Let's go to my car. I'll turn on the heater and give you a towel." In a car with a stranger. Kira eyed Timmy suspiciously, trying to see anything suspicious in him. But there was nothing to catch her eye. "You can see right through me, can't you?" the man smiled slyly. Kira thought and nodded. There was no point in denying it. This man seemed to see right through her too, and he was perfectly safe. In the car, Timmy handed Kira a terracloth towel. The girl wiped her hair, hands, face, and soaked sundress. The heater was pleasantly warming the cabin. At this temperature, everything would dry quickly. Kira enjoyed the long-awaited warmth. "You know, I need to make sure you're this anyway. Do you happen to have a special birthmark on your shoulder?" Kira flinched. But how would he know that? The girl didn't like to show off her birthmark. She didn't know why, but she hid it all the time. But here she moved the strap of her sundress, so Timmy could see what he was interested in. "It's you," the man smiled. Kira even thought there were tears glistening in his eyes. "Wow, you found yourself. After all these years, Camellia will be happy." Kira tried to figure out from the man's eyes what was going on, but she couldn't read anything in them. It happened. Not everything was revealed to Kira. "Maybe you can explain to me what's going on," the girl asked. "I don't understand anything at all." Of course, the story is a very long, convoluted one, but you should know it. The main thing is that you have found yourself. Everything will be all right now, Timmy began his story. Timmy and his younger sister Camellia were born and raised in the community. Their father died early. Timmy was barely 5 years old at the time. Camellia was just a baby, only 2 years old. She didn't remember her parents. 3 years later, the children's mother died, leaving them orphans. The community, of course, did not abandon them. But the situation of orphans in it was unenviable. The children were forced to work hard to justify their existence. They were fed, but they hardly saw sweets, nor did they see affection. The only person who was kind to the siblings was still the old woman Zendaya. She had once been very friendly with Timmy and Camelia's own grandmother. She considered her almost a sister, so she treated her old friends' grandchildren with warmth and care. But her kind words meant a lot to the children. Zendia tried to teach the little ones how to read and write. Timmy picked up everything at the drop of a hat. He learned to read and write, and he counted well. He was a smart kid, too. He liked his studies very much. Camellia didn't like lessons, but she saw people's illnesses and was able to warn them of trouble in advance, so that they had time to take some measures. For this gift, Camellia was valued in the community. True, it only meant more work for the girl. There were no allowances for her labors. "It's just like mine," Kira couldn't help but shout. "I, too, see the diseases and troubles that threaten people. Like today." "Of course you do," Timmy smiled. "You're Camelia's own daughter, aren't you?" "Yes, that's the gift that's passed down from mother to daughter." The man pulled out his passport. It held a picture of his sister. Kira looked at the picture and gasped. The photo was of the same dark-haired woman she had seen in her dreams all these years. "Recognize her?" The man smiled contentedly. "You bet you do. You've met in dreams, haven't you? She was the one who came to see you. She's been watching over you, supporting you as best she could." "So this is Mom, that woman from the dreams?" "Yes, girl. That's your mommy." Camellia and Timmy grew up quickly. No one picked on Timmy. Who cared about a bum? A bum. Camellia, on the other hand, was to be married to an old widower. Of course, the girl was horrified at the prospect, but no one had any intention of asking her. At that time, the community was near a town, and Camellia met a young man at the market. Feelings flared up between them. The young man even wanted to steal away his beloved. But the community found out about it and did something to him. Either a severe beating or something worse. And they kept Camellia locked up so she wouldn't interfere or warn the boy. Timmy smuggled her food and water in there without anyone seeing. So the congregation left the place and moved on. They were getting ready for the wedding of Camellia and the widower. And then it turned out that Camellia was expecting a child. The timing suggested that the father was the same guy. The fetus was tried to be eradicated. Camellia herself wanted to keep the baby and fought back violently. They had to twist her, hold her down, but no potions worked on the child. A strong child, the women said. No other way than a special gift. It was decided to leave her alone for a while. To wait for the birth. The wedding, of course, was postponed. The widower did not want to take a bride in a state, as he put it. And then came the day when Camellia realized, very soon she will meet with a child. At that moment, the young mother already knew that she was carrying a girl on her heart, saw her in a dream, and she thought of a name for her. "It's beautiful." Vita, Timmy smiled. "We were all hoping the elders would let us keep the baby girl in the community. Let her grow up with the other local orphans. We've got quite a few of them, but it didn't work out." Upon seeing the newborn girl, the midwife who delivered Camellia's baby changed her face. "There it is, the mark," the woman said clearly. Indeed, the baby girl had an African-shaped birthmark on her shoulder, a mark of power. This startled the community. They had never encountered such power before. The unknown was frightening, as well as the girl's possible revenge. After all, she would grow up and, of course, find out that they wanted to get rid of her, tried to destroy her while she was still in the womb. The wedding of Camellia and the rich widower was to take place in a week. What would happen to her girl? The bride didn't know, but the decision had already been made. It was just that Camellia had not been privy to the plans of the elders, lest she do something unforeseen. With a baby girl in her arms, Camellia was calm, predictable. How would a mother behave if her child was taken from her? The community didn't want to take any risks. So one night, when Camellia was asleep, you were simply snatched away from your mother. Timmy shook his head. She woke up and the baby was gone. Imagine your mother's horror. Camelia and I thought you were dead at first, but then my sister saw the baby in her sleep and realized her daughter was her. The villagers had just left the girl in the field, dumped the baby on the road at night, left her to die. No one could have imagined that Vita would be found, taken into the family, raised. In general, Camelia, of course, almost went mad with grief. They decided to postpone the wedding again for a couple of weeks so that the bride got used to the loss and came to her senses. Camelia and I didn't wait for the ceremony. We left the same day. There was no life for us in the community anyway. So we decided to try our luck outside the society we were born and raised in, and it all worked out. My brother and sister settled in a small town not far from where we escaped. They weren't really looked for. And so community members searched the town and its neighborhood for a couple of days and went on their way. It wasn't much of a loss. So that's where Timmy's literacy came in handy. He first worked as an apprentice in a workshop and learned to work with machines in the community. There was a lot of old machinery there. Years later, the man saved up money, gained experience, got the right connections, and opened his own business. At first, it was a small workshop. Then the business grew to a whole network. Timmy now owned several services. His sister, Camelia, worked at the hospital as a nurse. It was just the right place for her, a good fit. She could feel people's pain, even counsel doctors sometimes. Camelia never got an education. It was too late. But she found her place in life anyway. But Timmy did. He needed it for his business. "We've been looking for you," Timmy smiled. "We even hired detectives. And you're gonna laugh. We probably went to fortune tellers. Camelia knew you were alive, that you were all right. You saw each other in dreams, but out there in the dream world, you can't tell where a person is in reality. We couldn't figure out where you were. The search never stopped. My sister and I knew we would meet you sooner or later. And then today, quite by accident, you found me, jumping out onto the road. Just like Camelia in her youth, just like you. My heart jumped at once. I knew in an instant. Timmy arrived today for the wedding of his business partner's son. The young man had been in love with his fiancée since high school, but they started dating after graduation. The guy was just at the pinnacle of bliss. Mia's a bride. I mean, she's such a good girl, Timmy smiled. What a blessing it is that Mia is still alive, and it's all thanks to you. That bouquet Kira stretched out thoughtfully. Only now did she notice that she was still clutching it in her hand. It turns out he not only changed the bride's fate, but mine as well. It's so strange. It could be that this time this unknown force wanted to help me. It turns out so, Timmy smiled fondly as he looked at his niece. A bouquet and changed the fates of two beautiful girls at once. Unbelievable. "Shall we go to Mom's?" Kira pronounced. She really wanted to see Camelia, the woman who had supported her all her life, and to finally hear her voice. Timmy nodded with a smile and started the engine.
"Calm him down," yelled a disgruntled lady on the train. The father's reply made the whole carload of. When Selena was just about to leave the house with her husband Harvey, someone rang the doorbell. She did not hurry to open the door, as she is in a hurry to visit family friends. Time is very short. She has to stop by to buy presents. It seemed that the unexpected guest was not going to leave. The calls became more insistent. Selena ran to the door, peered through the peephole, and exclaimed loudly, "Oh my God!" She hurried to open the door. In front of her stood her son Mickey. "Mom, I thought you weren't home." "Come in, son. Why are you like this?" "You should have warned me. Your father and I almost went to visit." "Casey, come on in." "Mom, I'd like you to meet Casey, my wife. I told you about her, so we decided to surprise you and sign her ourselves." Mickey shocked his parents with his announcement. Selena thought for a moment, trying to remember when Mickey had talked about this Casey. He talked about a lot of girls, but Selena didn't remember much about Casey in particular. In front of her stood a short, full-figured girl with dyed hair and dark circles under her eyes. Selena wasn't particularly thrilled, but now was not the time to show it. Harvey, look who's here." Selena escorted her son and her daughter-in-law into the living room. Harvey, who had already spent an hour in front of the mirror trying to tie his tie, was overjoyed to see his son. "That's news. Mother, our son has a knack for surprises. If he'd been half an hour late, we'd have had to stand at the door until evening." "How are you, my son? Welcome home." Harvey greeted his son warmly, then looked questioningly at Casey, who was a little embarrassed, and said hello. "It's Walker's anniversary today. My mother and I are going to see them. Are you coming with us, or are you going to stay home and rest?" Harvey asked. "No, Dad. You go and have fun, and we'll get some rest," Casey said Mickey. "Well, as you wish. The main thing is not to be bored here without us," said Selena, and hurried her husband. As soon as the married couple left the apartment and the door closed behind them, Selena said to her husband, "Have you seen, what's going on? Who the hell is this Casey girl? He says he told me about her, and I don't remember anything, but I don't like that girl. She don't even look like Mickey. Look at him. He's handsome, well-mannered, and this girl doesn't impress me." Selena started to grumble. "Mother, stop it. Mickey's a big boy. He can decide what he wants to do with his life. What's it to you and me? Let him live his life. Let him make his own choices. A girl's just a girl to me. I'm talking about you," Harvey said and laughed. As the celebration at Walker's was drawing to a close, a tipsy Harvey made a toast. "It was a good holiday today. I want to continue it. You, Maria, and Alexander are celebrating 30 years of life together, and on the same day, we learned that a new cell of society has appeared in our circle. To be more precise, our Mickey brought a bride into the house. So in a week's time, we'll be expecting the same group of people at our house. Congratulations and wishes in honor of Maria and Alexander smoothly flowed to Selena and Harvey. The guests gladly accepted the proposal to celebrate the marriage of Mickey and Casey in a week in a small circle of friends. The next day, Selena's family had a closer encounter with Casey. Selena kept trying to convince herself that her vague doubts about Casey's unworthiness of her son were just her usual maternal reaction. She'd asked a lot of questions of Casey and was convinced that she was a typical girl, not a bad character, and Harvey had reassured her. A week later, the family was ready to welcome guests to the restaurant. Family friends were toasting and presenting their gifts. Mickey sat quietly in the corner of the table accepting congratulations, while Casey was off and back again. As the event neared the halfway point, Selena noticed that Casey was becoming quite talkative, and after a while, she let go of controlling her behavior. Now she was bravely telling obscene jokes and drinking with her father-in-law's friends. When Selena tried to admonish her, Harvey gestured that it was okay. "Young, let them have fun. So what if she had a little too much to drink amidst the excitement?" said Harvey. "Amidst the excitement. And Cindy and Natalie will be saying tomorrow that Mickey brought some alcoholic into the house, and they'll be right. A girl's got to know how to behave in public." "I don't think anyone taught that girl how to behave in public," Selena hissed. When the guests were leaving, Casey couldn't stand on her own. Mickey tried to take her home as fast as he could, but she resented him for some reason and made her own complaints. All of this was happening in front of her parents. Selena could barely contain her emotions. The next day, Selena got up early as usual to make breakfast for the whole family. She went to the refrigerator, clearly unable to say hello to her mother-in-law, opened the door, found nothing for her hangover, and closed it again with a clatter. Casey, is something wrong? Selena tried to break the uneasy silence. I don't feel well. Where's the store around here? She asked, and Selena could smell the sharp odor of booze in her face. The store is in the courtyard on the first floor of this house, answered the mother-in-law. You should have known better, and it's not proper to get drunk in front of guests, she added. But Casey didn't hear these words, because she had already left the door of the apartment, leaving it open. A few minutes later, while the pancakes were frying, Selena watched from the kitchen window as Casey came out of the store with a bottle of beer in her hands, sat on a bench in the yard, and smoked. As the next pancakes were being fried, she saw Harry, the neighbor's idle and drunken son, sit down next to Casey on the bench, and they began to chat animatedly. At the same time, another family was facing the dilemma of a daughter-in-law. The Weasley Seven's son John recently finished his studies at a prestigious university and got a job right away as an executive. John's mother, Mallory, had long dreamed of his wedding, so she began to rush with renewed vigor to get her son engaged in his personal life. Her son had no problems with his personal life. John has been dating Julia for a long time. They know each other well and do not imagine their lives apart. Therefore, John, not thinking long, offered Julia to move in with him. He promised that soon they would go to his parents in his native land. He would introduce them to them, and at the same time, they would determine the date of the wedding. When John arrived home with Julia, Mallory too looked on with great bewilderment. John, what about Angelica? She loves you so much. She's been waiting for your attention for a long time. It's a fine family, decent people, and they've known you since you were a child, said Mallory to John while Julia was in the kitchen. Mom, Angelica and I are just friends. She's nice, she's beautiful, but nothing can happen between us. Julia and I have been dating for 5 years. I can't imagine my life without her. I'm sure you'll like her very soon too, John said. John, we're not the kind of people who can let our feelings get in the way of sentimentality. You should have realized that my father and I are in business for life, and it's going to be in your hands soon. For this system to work as it has in the past, we need reliable connections in the government. Your father has served his time in the civil service. He's about to retire, and he'll probably be replaced by Frank, Angelica's father. Close ties with that family would guarantee our position, of course, and your welfare above all. That's why Angelica is the best match for you, Mallory continued to insist. Mom, my well-being depends only on me. I've got a good education, I have a good job, and I can achieve everything without sacrificing my happiness. If you want Frank, then be friends with him directly, without sacrificing the fate of your children. I'm sure Angelica probably feels the same way, John said. Then Mallory went back into the kitchen and looked at Julia setting the table so diligently. That girl is a good-looking girl. She had definitely received a good upbringing from her parents. She knew how to behave in public. She was polite and caring. A little later, she decided to discuss it with her husband Jacob. Jacob is a man with a lot of life experience and understanding of the realities of life. His many years of experience in leadership positions have helped him to become an insightful person. Jacob, you should talk to your son. Why feed a girl false hope? She's probably already fantasizing about marriage and a future with him. It's time to let her know that's not gonna happen. John has a purpose in life, and that purpose is to further our cause. And he needs to do everything he can to fulfill that purpose, including getting close to Frank, Valentina said. What does he say? Jacob asked. What? He says he loves this Julia, that he's going to make a career for himself on his own, so Frank and I can find another way to keep in touch and other selfishness. He's young. He doesn't understand a lot of things in life. He doesn't know how to deal with reality. He won't listen to us anyway, Jacob said blankly. So if we don't stop him, he'll do whatever he wants because he's young. That's why I'm telling you to talk to him. Otherwise, I'll talk to Julia myself, and things will be much tougher, said Mallory. Mother, don't you dare upset the young ones. Why would you do that? She's someone else's child too, and I'll talk to my son. Jacob reassured her. The doorbell rang, and Cecilia, the Weasley Seven's youngest daughter, ran to open it. She looked through the peephole and shouted toward her parents, "It's Lenka." Jacob and Mallory looked at each other in silence. Angelica will be surprised to see Julia so diligently setting the table in the kitchen. Angelica is Frank's only daughter. She and John went to the same daycare, went to the same school. She's always liked John. Even after Angelica studied abroad for 5 years and returned, she still has warm feelings for John. Angelica, you're just in time. We're having a family dinner, Cecilia said and smiled enigmatically. Jacob, Mallory, hello. Dad says hi. Angelica was standing on the living room doorstep the next second, smiling her radiant smile. Hello, Angelica. Health to your parents, she heard back from John's parents. Thank you, Mallory. I heard that Oleshka came from the city. Angelica smiled enigmatically. Angelica and I will sit on the balcony. Cecilia adequately assessed the situation and tried to take Angelica away to gently prepare her to meet the new member of the family. Angelica and Cecilia were like two sisters, so when John brought Julia to the house, Cecilia was immediately worried about Angelica. She thoughtfully called Angelica and told her that John had arrived. Cecilia hurried to meet Angelica herself first, to bring her up to date with the news and prepare her before she met John. Angelica, how long have you been in touch with John? Cecilia asked. A long time ago, you might say. Lately, I hadn't been able to get in touch with him. Either he was busy, or he wasn't in the mood. I decided not to insist on communication. I decided to wait for him to come, and then I could communicate with him in person. Angelica said, not suspecting anything yet. Well, in that case, I can explain his behavior to you. He got a girlfriend. They decided to get married. He brought her to us. She's at our house now, Cecilia said. What did your parents say? Angelica asked. Mom's against it, of course. Dad hasn't spoken up yet. But believe me, his parents won't let him marry that girl. And John himself has only ever favored you. That girl from the village wanted a beautiful life and probably just turned his head, Cecilia said. But John's a grown man anyway. I wouldn't want to have a relationship with him, knowing that he intended to marry someone else. If he decides to choose her, so be it, Angelica said. Are you crazy? Don't be so naive. You realize that John is every girl's dream, and you're one of them. If you give up, there's a good chance you'll meet some strange man with strange intentions. These hunters for women's hearts are usually very skillful, will tell you about high feelings and selfless love. They themselves will only have in mind your money and connections. I can see that in John's girlfriend. She gets up bright and early every day and tries to please every member of our family. It's understandable that she has a lot of interests, and you're just gonna put your hands down and say, whatever John decides, that's what happens. John can decide with this upstart, not with reality, Cecilia said. What do you suggest? Do you want me to fight for him? Angelica asked. Fighting or helping John make smart choices can be called many things, but you should consider that our whole family is on your side. Your whole family is on your side. Our parents and yours will only be happy about your marriage, and you both benefit from it. You think, with those initial conditions, it's possible to try, don't you? Cecilia challenged Angelique. Angelica stared thoughtfully out the window and pondered Cecilia's words. Cecilia realized she was going in the right direction and continued her speech. This plan means you won't have to work too hard. I don't know how long John and his girlfriend will be here, but Mom and I will figure something out. All you have to do is wait for our signals and proceed as instructed. Our goal is to sow discord between John and this girl, and every time he feels bad about the conflict, you will appear as an understanding friend. We'll take it from there, Cecilia said in a businesslike tone. Well, if you're willing to help me, I'm gonna try to compete for John. To be honest, I still like him. Hoping for his attention, I've rejected a lot of people. There must be some logic to it, right? Now Angelica was starting to convince herself. Julia had almost set the table in the kitchen and was waiting for her fiance's family, not realizing what events awaited her in her life with John. Jacob talked to John the next day, of course, but he made it clear that he had already decided to be with Julia, and it was useless to dissuade him. As for the rationality of getting closer to Frank's family, John advised that it would be better to marry Cecilia to their wayward son, which, of course, Mallory and Jacob would never agree to. What parents would want to marry off their daughter to an unreliable young man? And is it acceptable to play with the fate of someone else's daughter, who has crystal clear intentions of starting a family and continuing the family lineage? This is a question not usually asked in the families of grooms. A few days later, Cecilia was sitting on the balcony of their huge mansion, looking at something on her phone while chatting with one of her friends. When she was done, she went down to the kitchen on the first floor. Here Julia was diligently preparing something for dinner. Oh, it smells so good. How lucky John is to have a wife. She's beautiful and caring, and she cooks deliciously, Cecilia said with a wide smile. Julia had no idea about the family arguments surrounding her marriage to John within the Weasley family. None of the family members had given any indication that she wasn't welcome here, and they would soon begin to actively set about eliminating her. But she had taken Mallory's somewhat cold attitude as the norm. I've heard that mothers are often jealous of their sons of their daughters-in-law. Yet she has had full ownership of her son for 27 years, and now I share that attention with her. Maybe she's not used to sharing her son with me yet, but that's okay. I'll find my way to her heart. She is the woman who gave birth to and raised the man of my dreams. I'll always show her the respect she deserves, no matter how she treats me. Julia thought to herself and set herself up for the best. Cecilia did not show her true attitude in any way. She treated Julia with the utmost courtesy and complimented her. When they were alone together, though, Cecilia was free to be sarcastic and caustic about Julia's background. She was the daughter of ordinary people, not of officials like John and Cecilia. But Julia's mother tried to raise her to be a decent person, so she judges everyone by herself. So when Cecilia allows you to make barbed remarks, Julia ignores them. In this way, she convinces herself that she holds the bar high in her behavior. This is a common misconception of many women, not considering the fact that others may perceive it as a weakness. I admire how divine your baked goods are. Cecilia gave Julia a fat dose of flattery. Yeah, I love working with pastry. This pie with curd and lemon. Do you want a slice? It's really hot off the presses. Julia was genuinely pleased at the attention. No thanks. I don't eat sweets. All flour and sweets are poor people's food because they are low quality and cheap. And I advise you not to eat too much of it, or you'll get fat like the village women, Cecilia said, and continued to look at Julia with a smirk. Julia was taken aback by this unexpected barb. While she was considering what to say to Cecilia, or whether she should answer at all, she asked, John, when's he coming? You didn't call him. No, she hasn't called. I think she'll be here soon, Julia said after Cecilia, who had already left the kitchen. All of Julia's euphoria over the flavorful pie had turned into an unpleasant residue. Cecilia's got a talent for it. To compliment and thereby emphasize one's belonging to the world of the chosen ones is still a skill. John arrived just in time for dinner. Cecilia met him at the entrance and held her smartphone screen up to his face. Look, this bracelet from a very famous brand just went on sale 2 weeks ago. My mum showed it to me, she really liked it. Let's give her a present and split the money and buy her this bracelet. What do you say? Cecilia asked her brother. What's the occasion? John asked. What do you need an excuse to make your mom feel good? Can't you just surprise her? How hard can it be? Cecilia began to subtly press her brother. Come on, surprise, surprise. How much is it? I'll give you the amount. You buy it yourself. Okay. Oh, okay. That'll be $500. Mine's ready, Cecilia said. John pulled out his cell phone, made a couple of clicks on the screen, and told his sister, I put it on your card. Don't forget to tell Mom it's from both of us. I want to see her happy too, John said one last time. A couple of days later at dinner, Cecilia stood up and ceremoniously handed the branded bracelet to her mother. She was surprised at the unexpected gift, but the children convinced her that it was normal to make pleasant surprises without an occasion. Mallory accepted the children's gift with great joy. At the family dinner, Cecilia announced that Angelica was having a small party tonight, and she was invited. Her parents didn't wait for Cecilia's request to let her go, but suggested that she go to Frank's house and join the party. Cecily emphasized that if it was late, she would stay there overnight. She repeated to each member of the family not to expect her for the night and to go to bed. At midnight, when all the family members were already fast asleep, Cecilia quietly opened all the doors of the house with her key and made her way to her mother's room on the chains. She knows very well where her mother keeps her precious jewelry. As one would expect, the newly gifted brand name bracelet was also in that place. Cecilia took the jewelry box and also on the chains made her way to the dressing room where Julia keeps her things. Then she also quietly closed all the doors behind her with her keys and went to continue the festivities. When Cecilia returned to her home in the morning, Mallory had already discovered the missing items and sat in confusion. When she saw Cecilia, she told her that she had lost the bracelet she had given her yesterday. Cecilia was not confused. Julia, have you seen Mom's bracelet we gave her yesterday? Julia ran out of the kitchen where she was washing dishes and answered, No, I haven't. It's a shame, Mallory. Maybe you put it somewhere and forgot about it. Julia said, I vividly remember trying it on in front of the mirror in my powder room and putting it back in its box. I even remember I was going to wear it to work today and brag to everyone that the kids gave it to me, Mallory said. Mom, let's take another good look in your room. How can anything be missing from the house if no one has touched it? Cecilia said and led her mother to the second floor. There Cecilia pretended to look for the lost bracelet for a while. The voice inside her told Julia that something dangerous was going on around her. She decided to push the unpleasant thoughts away and remembered to go to the supermarket and get some groceries. While her mother-in-law and her daughter were on the second floor, she took her bag from the dressing room and headed for the exit. Julia, wait! She was stopped by the imperious voice of Cecily, who was coming down from the second floor. I looked in my mom's room, and it's really not there. It couldn't have disappeared into nowhere. It could have ended up in another woman's hands. I was out last night. Mom was asleep, which means the other woman is you. Where is the bracelet? Cecilia asked threateningly. How could you think that about me? I didn't even touch the bracelet. Julia was even more confused. Cecilia said, then walked over to Julia, quickly grabbed her bag out of her hands, and turned it upside down. The entire contents of the bag scattered to the floor. The bracelet box fell at Mallory's feet. July, stealing is wrong. If John finds out, he'll be very upset. You could just ask him to give you one too. Cecilia continued in an admonishing tone. This is some kind of mistake. This is a setup. I never even thought about stealing anything from Mallory. Julia only now realized how difficult it would be for her to prove her innocence to these people, and she was horrified. As Cecilia continued to talk, Julia sprinted out the door and headed for the bench outside. She immediately called and told John everything. He promised to take care of it tonight and asked her to wait for him. At that moment, Cecilia dialed Angelica's number to delight her with the news. Angelica, get ready. John and his girlfriend are going to have some serious problems tonight. You need to call and prove yourself a loyal friend. Make John want to spend the rest of the evening with you. Invite him out. He'll definitely go out tonight," Cecilia said and hung up. Mallory didn't pay much attention to who her daughter was whispering to on the balcony. She was completely immersed in her own emotions and only repeated to herself that she knew this girl would not bring good to the family. In the evening, there was a real showdown. Julia cried, swearing by all the saints that she had touched nothing. Cecilia, on the other hand, was unwavering in her accusations. Mallory sided with her daughter. Only Jacob realized that there seemed to be two separate factions within the family, and one of them had declared war on the other today. John realized it too. So when Angelica called him and asked him to spend the evening together in a languid voice, he briefly rejected all her offers and turned to Julia. "We need to talk in private. Mom will be late. You and Cecilia try to calm down and forget all the talk of the day," John said. He took Julia to the nearest cafe, and they discussed what had happened for a long time. John drew the right conclusions and decided to act immediately. Meanwhile, another family had their own dramas going on. Selena came home from work early so she could make dinner for the whole family. She already knows it's useless to ask her sister-in-law Cassie to do this. Even though she stays at home and doesn't work anywhere, Cassie will find 1,000 excuses to dodge any housework. Opening the door with her key, she was surprised to see unfamiliar shoes in the passage. And from the kitchen came cheerful voices. She walked into the kitchen and saw the neighbor's son Harry. As befitted Harry's usual lifestyle, there were cans of beer and some kind of snacks from bags on the table. "What's going on here? Casey, did you bring him into the house?" Selena asked. "Hello, neighbor. I was just stopping by for tea." "Peace out," Harry said, leaning back in his chair. Casey wasn't in the kitchen. She'd raised her voice from the living room. "Yes." The neighbor from the stairwell came by to say hello. Casey rushed to explain everything to her mother-in-law. "Okay, Harry, we're not being very hospitable here. You please go home, and Casey and I have chores to do," Selena said. "Everything is as the mistress says it will be. I'm leaving for sure. Ulek, you're great. Come over to my place too. We'll have a beer and play some dungeons," Harry said and walked slowly towards the exit. As soon as the door closed behind Seryoga, Selena took Casey by the elbow and said menacingly, "Are you out of your mind? How many times have I seen you messing around with that bum in the yard?" And I kept quiet, thinking you knew what you were doing. "Why the hell are you bringing strange men into the house when my son isn't here? And why is it a neighbor? Didn't you think it's abnormal to bring an ex-con into the house? A convict?" I didn't know that. Casey still didn't understand her mother-in-law's reaction. "And he told me he was in the army on contract," she continued. Selena could smell the acrid odor of alcohol from Casey. "Woe is me, woe is me. An educated, well-mannered son brought into the house of an obscure girl. She is here all the alcoholics from the neighborhood, and she drinks with them at the same time. Why do I have to go through this ordeal?" Selena clutched her heart. "So he's your neighbor. He asked to come to your house. How was I supposed to know he was a convict? Your son loves me, and you're just jealous. That's why you don't let us live in peace. I'll tell him everything," said Casey. She's always so brave when she's drunk. And she drank a lot, as Mickey's parents had noticed. By this time, Selena had already dialed her husband's number and was telling him what she thought about Casey for the umpteenth time. Harvey seemed to want to avoid quarrels in the family as always and tried to calm down his wife. She couldn't stand it and almost became hysterical. "She carries our grandson in her belly, drinks alcohol every single day, and is always hanging out with our neighbors. Now I have big doubts whether our grandson is in her belly. Talk to my son and tell him to deal with her immediately. Otherwise, I'll have to kick her out of the door myself." Casey heard those words and got turned on too. "Oh, so you did tell me that we got married in wedlock. I knew it was a red flag to any mother-in-law. She mumbled to herself and dialed Mickey's number. But that was just one episode in the life of Mickey's family. Ever since Casey arrived in the house, scandals have become a regular occurrence. He and his father barely have time to calm their women down. Mickey realized that Casey really doesn't show herself as a woman. She can't cook. She's not used to keeping her house clean. She doesn't want to work anywhere because she thinks that everyone is cheating and underpaying her. He found out about all this too late. By that time, Casey was already pregnant and demanded from Mickey to take responsibility for her and for the future child. Mickey, like a decent man, agreed to all of Casey's demands. Selena, on the other hand, couldn't accept it. She hoped to see an educated and well-mannered girl as her son's life partner. Well, at least a girl without bad habits and without the tendency to start conversations with every man in the yard. But where to go now when soon a grandson or granddaughter will be born? Selena only prayed that a healthy child would be born. Unfortunately, Casey's lifestyle didn't predispose her to that. No matter how much Selena talks about the harmfulness of beer, energy drinks, and quick snacks from bags, Casey immediately complains to Mickey that her mother is jealous and does not give her life. After the incident with the missing bracelet, John talks to his father and makes the right decision. He and Julia are not going to live peacefully in the same house with Cecilia and his mother. John rented an apartment and moved Julia there. The wedding was also decided not to postpone for later. However, both were very worried because the opponents of this wedding turned out to be enough, and it is not known what they can still throw out on this day. The news that John and Julia had planned a wedding for next month puzzled Cecilia and Angelica. Angelica was sure that Cecilia would definitely think of something to keep the wedding from happening. But when they heard the date of the wedding, they decided not to give up. There was still plenty of time. If they couldn't upset the wedding, they could organize something special right on the day of the wedding, so that the marriage wouldn't last long. This idea encouraged Cecilia, and she decided to go ahead. John and Julia decided to hold the wedding modestly and for a small circle of the closest people. They booked a restaurant and distributed invitations to all the guests. On the appointed day, Julia excitedly prepared for the most important event in her life. Her parents arrived in advance, but John's parents didn't want to meet and get to know them beforehand. "I'll see you at the wedding. I don't have time for you now," Mallory replied briefly to the introduction. John and Julia didn't pay much attention to the relationship between their parents that wasn't working out and were looking forward to the best. Angelica and Cecilia had bought fancy dresses for the occasion. But that was not all their preparations. The main surprise required more preparation and more effort. They even had to pay for it. They did not stand for the price. The long-awaited day came. The wedding was in full swing. The guests made toasts, congratulated the newlyweds, and had fun. The parents did not particularly seek each other's company, and each of them sat in the circle of their loved ones. As the evening approached its midpoint, Cecilia stepped out to make sure her plan was ready. After a long musical intermission, the guests went to their tables. An unfamiliar, beautiful girl entered the room and drew the attention of all the guests to herself. Because she was wearing a wedding dress, the guests thought for a moment that they were imagining it. But Julia was still sitting next to John, and it was some other bride. John, on the other hand, turned white when he saw the girl in the wedding dress. The stranger in the wedding dress discreetly took the microphone from the Toastmasters table and began her prepared speech. "John, you're probably wondering why I'm wearing a wedding dress today. I think you remember the date exactly 4 years ago today. Long before that day, you told me that you dreamed of seeing me next to you in a white dress. Then you and I decided to realize our dream and secretly got married." The guests sobered up instantly and began to murmur among themselves. The parents looked at the girl with the microphone and John in total confusion. John stood there like a stumbling block, unable to think or say anything. At that moment, a video about the love story of John and this mysterious girl in a wedding dress started on the huge screen in the restaurant's festive hall. Yes, indeed, in the frames John shines in the image of a happy groom who is languidly waiting to meet his bride with a bouquet in his hands. In the next shots, this strange girl is spinning at the mirror and puts the finishing touches on the image of the bride. The beautiful shots are accompanied by a romantic song. The girl asked for the audience's attention and continued her speech. "And then you walked away, leaving me and my daughter. You betrayed our love, but I decided never to betray it. That's why I still wear my wedding ring." The girl raised her right hand and showed her ring finger with her wedding ring to the audience. She then continued her speech. "You told me that fate may separate us, but you will always live in my heart as my first and only love. I decided to live the rest of my life by those words. That's why I tell our daughter that Daddy will come back to the family someday and we will be happy again, as we were on this day exactly 4 years ago. John, I see now that you have decided to start a new page in your life. However long your marriage to Julia lasts, may it be a happy one. But I know for a fact that you and I will be together again. I believe that our daughter you will definitely not leave without attention and affection," the girl continued to say. The bewildered Toastmaster stood next to the girl and persuaded her to give up the microphone. But the girl deftly dodged him and walked around the hall. He finally caught up with her and almost forcibly turned off the microphone. The girl finally shouted something in the direction of the newlyweds and left the room. But the love story continued on the screen. Julia almost fainted from what she had seen and heard. Accompanied by her friend, she went to the ladies' room, barely restraining her tears and emotions. The festive mood of the guests vanished in an instant. Jacob, who was almost impossible to get out of his mind, shook his head and sat with his hands over his face. Julia's parents started looking for their daughter to comfort her. They were even ready to take her away from here forever if she wanted to. John's friends said something indignant to him, but he heard nothing. In his head, there was only one thought: to take the microphone from the Toastmaster and all the guests to say the names of those who came up with this cynical number. But it was too late. The guests got into several groups and hurriedly left the hall to give time to the heroes of today to sort out among themselves. Who knows? Maybe the showdown would result in the wedding being cancelled. John got up from his seat and headed after Julia. He found her in the ladies' room. John was sure she was probably sobbing or hysterical by now, but it seemed he still underestimated her. "John, did you know this girl?" Julia asked. She was a little dejected, but she was in control and seemed to understand where the wind was coming from. "This is the first time I've ever seen her. In fact, I don't understand what kind of show this is. I've never dressed up as a groom before, and this is the first time I've ever done it, believe me. It's some kind of a setup, and I'll take care of it. It's only a matter of 2 minutes," said John. "Yes, I'd like to believe that version too. But how do we save the situation?" Julia asked. "The only people left in the audience are parents and friends. We'll continue with them. I'll take the microphone myself now and comment briefly, and that's it," John said. Everyone's mood was ruined. Only Angelica and Cecilia were sitting in the car in the restaurant parking lot, waiting with great curiosity to see how Julia would behave next. At that moment, someone knocked on the window of their car. Cecilia saw a hired actress from a local club who had played the role of the jilted bride brilliantly. She was waiting for the rest of her fee. The guests were so dumbfounded by what was happening that no one even paid attention to the fact that the strange bride, leaving the restaurant, got into the car of the acting troupe with large inscriptions and logo. She during this time managed to calmly change her clothes, disband her hair and put on glasses, so that no one even accidentally did not recognize her. The actress took the money, gave her accomplices their shares in the car, and the troupe left. "I'd never dreamed of such a weird wedding," Julia said, finally reaching the apartment. I'll start looking into who's behind this tomorrow. I think the event organizers and maybe the restaurant staff are involved. They're not going to get away with this, John said. Yes, this is a case where exposure is a must, Julia added. What did your parents say? They're the most embarrassed of all. And mine didn't give them a very warm welcome, John said. Well, my mom is aware that I have become the classic unloved daughter-in-law to my mother-in-law. I warned them that there might be all sorts of surprises. But I don't think they were ready for just such a surprise. Julia even smiled a little. John looked at her smile and felt immense gratitude for her trust and faith in him. It was only Julia's calmness and judgment that had saved the day. Although she had lost her temper at first, she was able to pull herself together quickly and not let the insidious plans of her detractors come to fruition. After the wedding, Angelica and Cecilia waited several days for news from the newlyweds. But there was no news. Angelica realized that it was pointless to keep fighting for John. Only Cecilia was not going to give up. She had a good reason. Cecilia works as a financial director for her mother. Mallory is about to take a well-deserved vacation. Of course, she's grooming her daughter to take her place. But for Mallory's business to continue to thrive from steady government contracts, someone in the family is bound to be in a position of power. Jacob, who has served as first deputy governor for more than 20 years, is about to take a well-deserved vacation. And that could mean the state contracts could go away and Mallory's firm could go out of business. Frakes had his eye on the job for a long time, and he's made no secret of it. And Jacob sees him as a worthy heir to his chair. In order for the scheme to continue to feed all those who have long been accustomed to the trough, there must be a very close cohesion between these people. Cecilia understood this very well. Therefore, she spared no money, time and energy to get rid of Julia and set up her brother John with the only daughter of Frank's family. But Julia turned out to be a tough nut to crack. During the next week after the wedding, John had no trouble figuring out how the strange girl got into the restaurant and how she got the dubious love story video broadcast. The restaurant staff, under pressure from John's friends in law enforcement, quickly admitted that some people came and made their own changes to the wedding program. They did not elaborate on what the specific changes were. That was their mistake. And none of them knew the actress. John found that actress through social media. When she was brought to the police station, she refused to talk. While the police officers were trying to get some information, they got a call from above asking them to release the actress immediately. John was pleased with the fact that it was possible to prove to everyone that it was an order number. And the identities of the people who invented and ordered all this noise were no longer so important. Well, I'll find out. They'll tell me it's my own sister Cecilia and her friend Angelica. Maybe even my mother knows. Who's going to feel better? I'd already know they're always plotting against Julia and our marriage. In time they will get tired of it and stop these cheap tricks. John explained his version to his friends. The friends did not insist on continuing the investigation. They were more worried about Julia and her reaction. When John told them that she was very calm and reasonable, the friends were very surprised and noted that John had really met a worthy woman. John himself knew this, and now he was quietly proud of it. Since the birth of her grandson Frederick, Selena has been forced to live on two homes. Between family and business, she makes sure to find time to drop in on Casey and Mickey. Casey continues to resent this, believing that mother-in-law interferes in her life. In fact, Casey has, as one might assume, become a worthless mother. She has absolutely no maternal feelings for her child. She is still drawn to the streets, where she can drink with someone or just disappear for long periods of time. That's when the child is left alone. Selena hopes to get her grandson into a kindergarten soon, and then she will feel better for him. But for now, the kindergarten refuses to accept him, as little Frederick is severely delayed in development. Today, Selena decided to visit her son's family again. She opened the door with her key. In the hallway, she saw the shoes of little Frederick and realized that the child was home alone again. The first thing she did was look in the children's room. Frederick is not here, and it is not by chance. He doesn't like to sit here. Usually little Frederick likes to mess around either in the bathroom or in the kitchen. Selena hurried into the kitchen. The kitchen door was closed for some reason. Selena opened it, and at the same moment her heart leaped into her heels. In front of the open windows of the kitchen balcony stands Frederick's plastic toy table, and on the table is his stool. Frederick himself stands on this stool and almost jumps out of the window, trying to scare away the pigeons that are crowding the window. Seeing her grandson in such a precarious position, Celine cried out his name. Frederick turned around and saw his grandmother running toward him. The child thought it was just a normal game. Many children think if someone is running towards them, they will catch up soon, hence the need to run. As Selena covered the distance between the kitchen door and the window in a few steps, Frederick managed to sneak onto the windowsill. He wasn't looking into the abyss where he wanted to take a step. He was looking at his dazed grandmother, and he was indescribably amused by it. Frederick was saved from the last fatal step by the deft movement of the grandmother when she was able to grasp Frederick with both hands. Selena lifted her grandson off the windowsill and carried him into the living room. Little Frederick still didn't understand what could have happened and continued to laugh, considering himself in the game. She dialed Casey's number. The latter didn't answer right away. As soon as Casey picked up, Selena almost shouted at her, "Where the hell are you? What kind of mother are you?" A child almost fell out of the window. "Selena, who asked you to come to us anytime you want?" "I can manage my child just fine without your help. I just went to the store for a few minutes," Casey said. Casey seems to be completely incapable of understanding the meaning of words and the consequences of various rash actions. Selena realized that a long time ago, and she's been trying to get it out to Mickey. But what's the use? By the way, does Mickey even know what's going on in the house while he's away? She dialed Mickey's number and told him what tragedy had been avoided a few minutes ago. "Mickey, this isn't a joke anymore. Your Casey's not likely to ever grow up and realize her responsibilities in life. But we're risking Frederick's safety and his life for her. Please don't ruin your life with her. Try to get rid of her. I can raise my grandson myself. It's better for him. And at least you'll have a chance to meet a decent woman," Selena said. She didn't notice that by then Casey was already in the apartment and had overheard the whole conversation. As soon as Selena hung up the phone, Casey burst into the living room and tried to snatch Frederick out of her grandmother's arms. As she did so, she was loudly resentful. "You still haven't gotten over your jealousy. You're even willing to divorce Mickey and me over it. You've been giving us a hard time since the beginning. We separated from you to save our family, but you keep interfering with it even from a distance," Casey said. "Otherwise, you'd still want to drink with the first man you meet, loiter and parasitize my son. You're hiding behind my son to continue your promiscuous lifestyle. You can't even realize that by doing so, you are sacrificing your child." Selena once again tries to get through to Casey, but in vain. There were many such conversations and incidents in this family's life, but they were useless to Casey. This time, after Selena threatened to take Frederick back to her place, Casey was afraid that she might push Mickey toward divorce. Without thinking long, she made a decision that would help keep Mickey in her life. A couple of months later, she was able to successfully implement her plan. The pregnancy test showed 2 stripes. Casey was confident that Mickey would not abandon a pregnant woman and then a woman with 2 children, and Selena would hardly dare to take on the responsibility of 2 small children at once at her advanced age. Casey was delighted with her resourceful decision and looked forward to the birth of her second baby girl. However, nothing had changed in her lifestyle. Parallel to these events, there were also changes in John's life with Julia. After the unpleasant surprise at the wedding, they didn't communicate with John's loved ones for a long time. During this time, they learned from the news that Jacob Wesley had left his post and Frank had taken his place. Surely, the question of removing Julia from John's life had become even more pressing for this family. But John and Julia decided to arrange their lives as they saw fit. John successfully built his career, succeeding at every step he took. Julia also worked until the birth of their daughter, Eva. Eva is now 3 years old. She makes her parents happy every minute and gives them endless happiness. Julia was thinking about going back to work these days. John was against it. "Julia, I don't want our Eva to have the stress of adjusting to daycare. She's such a homebody. In a couple of years, she'll want to be around other kids. Then you can think about work. Right now, I'm still willing to work day and night so that you and your daughter don't need anything," John said. "But I'm already bored sitting at home." Julia stretched lazily. Carrying a child under your heart, giving birth to it, and raising it is a huge labor. It's just something society has come to take for granted. I don't want to be so consumeristic with you. You need to rest and recuperate, and then you can think about work, if you think it would be good for you," John said. Such words sounded very convincing to Julia. She continued to enjoy motherhood and lovingly cared for Eva. It was a pity, though, that Eva had not yet been seen by her grandparents. They would have loved her for sure, and maybe they could forget old conflicts and finally recognize Julia's right to be near John. One cozy family evening, John called to say he wasn't expected for dinner tonight. This has happened to him often since he became an executive. Julia is very understanding. If she can't make it in time for dinner, she'll come back later. She and her daughter have a great time and are not affected by John's busy schedule. After a while, John said that soon there will be a corporate party in the company and everyone should come with their other halves. Julia happily agreed, as she had not known any of John's colleagues until then. John's team turned out to be really united and cheerful. The guests were having fun, singing and dancing. At some point, Julia decided to go to the ladies' room. She had not noticed until then that some of the guests had been watching her closely since the beginning of the evening, waiting for a more private moment with her. Following Julia out of the room was this mysterious man. As Julia stood in front of the restroom mirror fixing her hair, the mystery man dared to approach her, and it was a woman of great beauty, statuesque and haughty. "Hi, what's your name?" the lady asked. "I'm Julia. My spouse works in this company as a CFO," Julia said proudly. "I know him," the lady smiled enigmatically. The lady didn't say anything else and just watched Julia's every move with a smile. If at first she had thought that one of John's colleagues had decided to meet her just for the sake of politeness, now she was a little confused. The lady seemed to be following her purposefully. "How long have you and John been together?" the lady asked. 5 years in total, 4 of which we've been married. We have a wonderful daughter." Julia tried not to give away her doubts and keep her composure. "A little early," said the lady and smiled even wider. "What's a little early?" Julia asked. "It's a little early for him to start cheating on you, honey. Maybe it's for the best, and it'll be easier for you to find your man." She began to fix her hair thoughtfully. "What are you trying to say?" "It's okay. John loves me, I love him too. You gave birth to a daughter, I can give him a son. Just keep that in mind. The sooner you realize that I'll win, the easier it will be for you," the lady said, looking straight into Julia's eyes. Julia had an immediate sense of déjà vu. Throughout her life with John, how many times had she heard such threats? She couldn't count them all. As a rule, it was usually someone close to John who was behind them. Julia was glad that this time she hadn't given in to her emotions and had figured out what was going on almost immediately. On the way home, John asked about Julia's impressions of his co-workers. She shared all the positive aspects of the evening, "But a strange lady came up to me and tried to tell on you. But I'm an old-timer, and I know that intrigue against our family can be found anywhere, so I didn't argue with the lady. And by the way, I didn't even ask her name, Julia said, looking at her husband. John didn't comment on this, but drove on in silence. It was as if a whirlwind of emotion had started inside him, and he was trying to hide it carefully. Julia thought that John, too, had long since had enough of these cheap tricks, and that was why he was reacting in such a way. At this point, this incident was forgotten. After the birth of the second child, Casey was much less worried about her marriage to Mickey. Her position in the family is now stronger. Mickey loves his son and daughter very much. For their sake, he is ready to do anything. If Selena does not constantly interfere, as it seems to Casey, then Mickey is simply an ideal husband. But for Casey, it was completely unexpected when Mickey once poured a flood of emotions on her. Casey, a mother of two, can't be so careless. How many times can you leave your kids alone and go out with questionable friends? Who are these friends of yours? They're basically backyard drunks and bums. Do you really think you're on the same level as them? Everything has to be in moderation. I can't take endless days off work to take care of the kids. You need to rethink your lifestyle and get smart, said Mickey. Casey was even more confused. So she'd thought Mickey was on her side, but somehow Selena had swayed him to her side. It looked like her mother-in-law was getting serious about her now. That's what she thought, and took all the objective criticism she got. After a while, she really decided to change and become a responsible mother. In her mind, it looked like a working and earning woman. She decided to make a surprise for Mickey. She got a job as a sauna administrator, and Mickey informed her about it only on the eve of the first working day. But Mickey surprised her again with his reaction. Casey, you don't need to work and make money. I'm doing just fine. You just take good care of the children and don't think about money and work while they are little. When they grow up and become more independent, then please work for your own pleasure, Mickey said. Casey was very upset. She felt like she was being picked on for nothing. Everything she did was wrong, and everything was wrong. She remembered some advice from a fashion magazine that a woman should never give up on her goals, no matter what a man told her. So she decided not to give in to Mickey and go to work. Working in a sauna meant socializing with different people. However, those who wanted to socialize in the sauna often turned out to be drunk people. And these conversations are very specific. Young lady, you're so beautiful, but you're so sad. Did someone hurt you? On Casey's first day at work, there was a kind person at work who was ready to listen to her and feel sorry for her. Casey, out of the goodness of her heart, told her whole family story. The random visitor of the sauna must have regretted in his heart that he had started this conversation, but out of politeness, he listened to her to the end. As a man who lives solely in accord with his spontaneous impulses, the casual visitor made the decision to try to become a cordial friend to Casey. His name was Tony. Casey was getting more and more involved with Tony. He waited for her after work and took her to bars. Casey loved it when a man could just listen to your complaints and support you. And if he bought her a drink or a cocktail, in Casey's mind that equaled universal love. So Tony became a new meaning of life for her. Now, Casey could talk to him day and night. If Mickey or Selena were in a bad mood again, she could write or call Tony at any time. He would find time to take her to a bar, listen to her, and then spend a pleasant evening in solitude. Mickey was most worried about the children on a long business trip. The day before, he had sat Casey across from him and urged her to be more attentive and responsible for just a couple of weeks until he returned from his business trip. Casey took it all in stride again, but as soon as Mickey left, Casey asked her neighbor to watch the kids and went on the trip Tony had been asking her to take for a long time. Casey returned from her trip just before Mickey arrived, but the trouble was, their son Frederick seemed a little sick. Both of his eyes were swollen shut and almost completely closed. Cassie rebuked her neighbor for not keeping a good eye on him. When Mickey returned from his business trip and saw his son in such a state, he was furious. He decided to take Frederick to the doctor that same evening. The doctor examined the child and shook his head. It is an infectious disease that affects the eyeballs very quickly. It's especially dangerous for children. I'll certainly try to treat it now, but you're running out of time. Your son is at risk of losing his sight completely, the doctor said. Indeed, Frederick's eyes began to itch and ache right after Casey left for her trip. By the time she returned, the damage to his eyes was extensive, and the boy had almost stopped seeing. Mickey expressed all his anger and resentment toward Casey. She, on the other hand, saw no fault in it. She still believes that Mickey just doesn't let her live the life she wants, especially since Tony assures her that he does. That night, Casey couldn't take it any longer and expressed everything she had in her heart. You restrict me from everything. You didn't like it when I stayed home. I got a job and found myself. Now I finally feel like a free person. But you don't want to respect that. I'm a human being too, and I have the right to live my life the way I want, said Casey. Casey, for God's sake, I too dream of you living a full life. But now that you're a mother of 2 children, isn't it time to consider them in your life? Do you feel like you can leave the house at any time to go out with your friends and party until morning? And mind you, this doesn't happen on holidays or on a schedule. It's your normal way of life. You reproach me with limitation. But do you have any standards of life yourself? Mickey asked. You're always torturing me with your conditions and demands, but it's different with Tony. He understands and supports me. I can have fun with him and talk to him. Not like you and your family, who have to do everything according to a set of rules, Casey blurted out. Mickey had a vague idea, of course, that working in an entertainment establishment was very much to Casey's liking. But he hadn't expected her to find another entertainer so quickly and to believe that it was the highest of feelings for life. By then, he'd had enough of that kind of life. As a result of that evening's arguments, they decided to part ways. Mickey felt it was right for the children to be raised by a hired nanny or their grandmother. Casey packed her things and left for Tony's. Mickey didn't bother to stop her. He was more concerned about Frederick's health. According to the doctor, only a major operation could restore his sight. And before the operation, someone should take care of the children. Selena, of course, had taken over completely. Mickey has decided to redouble his efforts at work to save up the money for the operation as soon as possible. He had to hurry up because Frederick would soon be starting preschool, and then it wouldn't be long before school. Changes were on the way for the second family. Julia only now noticed how much John had changed lately. He'd grown cold to her. Where before he would only stay at work for a few hours, now he might stay all night or even several nights. Julia was afraid to suspect him of cheating. She realized that if she judged based only on her assumptions, it would mislead her even more. And in order not to make mistakes in relationships, she needed to be very patient and judicious. Her past experience is a testament to that. How many times she could give in to the impulse of her emotions and lose her relationship with John for no good reason. So she decided not to make any decisions until she sees with her own eyes John's infidelity or another reason for his cooling off. Eva is already big enough, goes to kindergarten and dreams of going to school sooner. Julia intends to go to work soon and distract herself from bad thoughts about John. Could it be that sitting on such a long maternity leave, she too has become monotonous and uninteresting for John? On one such evening, John arrived unexpectedly early. He was drunk, something Julia had not observed him doing before. Little Eva missed her father and was now trying to draw attention to herself in every possible way. Julia noticed this and said, "Since you're home, why don't you and Eva take a walk while I clean the house and make dinner? Don't you have time to walk the baby all day?" John said in surprise. "We go out with her every day. Can't you see she misses you? Both parents are important to a child. I don't understand your reaction, Julia said in a calm tone. Both parents? Here I am, for example, an adult child, almost 5 years out of touch with my parents. What am I supposed to do? John came very close and looked at Julia angrily. Julia was dumbfounded by John's unexpected behavior. She seemed to realize where her husband wanted to take the conversation. While she was trying to answer, John continued his claims. Julia, do you think it's okay that I don't talk to my parents or even try? As a mom, you're supposed to be better at this than I am. Or do you still think my parents are our enemies? Julia realized that she had been hesitant to talk to John about it for such a long time. She'd realized for a long time that she and John would sooner or later have to resolve the issue with her parents and most likely make the first step toward reconciliation. Only she knew John's adamant nature and had been hesitant to suggest it to him. And now she realizes that she was too late with this conversation. That night, Julia clearly realized that John felt resentment and anger towards Julia for not communicating with his parents. Like a reasonable woman, instead of returning resentment and recriminations, she began to think of ways to repair John's relationship with his parents. Eventually, she was able to formulate a clear plan. Mallory's birthday was coming up. Under this pretext, they will visit the parents with gifts, show them a granddaughter, and Julia will try to get Mallory back to her. But these plans were not to be. A couple days later, John came home drunk again. He had gotten caught up in some little thing and turned it into a big family scandal. This time, Julia learned something else new. John threatened to kick her out of the house, and Eva would stay with him. But Julia didn't understand why she deserved such an attitude. Her beloved husband didn't bother to explain. From that moment on, constant recriminations and scandals became a common occurrence in Julia's family life. It was little Eva who suffered the most. She began to sleep badly at night and practically refused to eat. After a while, her hair began to fall out. Then Julia became angry too. She decided to put an end to these endless conflicts, no matter what it cost her. She only had to look closely at his behavior to understand the reason for it. He had obviously been hiding something from her for a long time, but he had no desire to hide it any longer. In such cases, modern people are always helped by cell phones. Julia had never allowed herself to violate her husband's personal boundaries before, but today she realized that she had to deal with everything urgently and make important decisions. She reached for John's cell phone with these thoughts in mind. She wasn't too surprised when she found correspondence with someone named Sarah. There she saw various photos of Sarah and recognized her at once. It was the same lady who approached Julia at the corporate party and assured her that she and John were in great love. Then Julia took it for another intrigue of her enemies. Turns out she was very wrong. Judging by the correspondence, Sarah and John have gone very far. They have been living as a family for a long time and making common plans for the future. According to Sarah's messages, she has now pushed John into a narrow framework and set conditions for him to choose one of two women. Of course, Sarah makes it clear by the word choice that it's eliminating Julia and starting a new life with her. At that moment, John came out of the bathroom and saw Julia with his phone in her hands. Julia didn't pretend that nothing had happened. She was even relieved that the situation was finally clearer. John, too, seemed to have been waiting for this moment for a long time. Julia silently began to pack her daughter's things and put them in her suitcase. John saw the whole process and did not react. Couldn't you just say it without these protracted scandals that have been going on for almost 6 months? Julia was talking to herself. Julia has a long journey ahead of her as her parents live in another area. But Julia did not want to go to them. She had already thought out her future life. She and Eva would get to the capital. She would put her in a kindergarten, find a job, solve the housing problem, and then she would go to her parents and tell them about everything. And maybe John will still come to his senses and make a step forward during this time. In this case, Julia is ready to think everything over and once again try to save the family. But now she sees no point in it, as John is completely infatuated with Sarah, and in his picture of the world, Julia is still an extra person. As Julia packed 2 suitcases and headed for the exit, John stopped her. "Take only your things. Eva will stay with me," he said in a determined tone. "You'll have a new life now. Eva is still young and she has suffered enough from our fights with you. She needs care and peace, so I will take her with me anyway," Julia said. "Where will you take her? You have no job, no place to live. I won't let my child suffer a miserable existence. Please don't forget that Eve is the daughter of the Weasley family. She's entitled to a certain standard of living," John said, shocking Julia once again. The long argument turned into a loud scandal. As a result, John pushed Julia so that she fell to the floor. While she got up and came to her senses, he took her apartment keys, locked the door from the outside, and left. Julia had intended to pick up Eva from the daycare center and go straight to the train station. Now she wouldn't get to the daycare center either. She tried to call John and talk to him, but he dropped her calls. Julia hoped to the last minute that John would pick Eva up from the daycare center and bring her home in the evening. But in the evening, neither John nor Eva was there. She continued to call John persistently until she realized that he had finally blacklisted her. John showed up well past midnight. He was drunk again and incredibly angry with Julia. "Where's Eva? Did you pick her up from daycare?" Julia asked. "Don't worry about Eve. She's part of the Weasley family. It's about time she met her folks. I picked her up from preschool and took her to her parents' house. She's immensely loved and spoiled there. You can go wherever you want now." John opened the front door of the apartment and pointed his finger toward the exit. "John, come on. Eve's just a little girl. You can't keep me away from her. You tell me what I've done to deserve this punishment. I'm ready to let you go. I've always been ready to reconcile with your parents and try endlessly to win their favor. You're wrong if you think I've separated you from them. John, let's calmly discuss everything and make a decision together," Julia pleaded, but it was useless. John didn't listen to her words. He first pushed her suitcase out the door, then took her by the arm and pushed her out onto the landing. Julia realized that she had failed in her fight for her love. If she had been able to defeat all the intrigues thanks to John's love and support, what about now that he had betrayed her? Julia wandered around the city all night with her suitcase. In the morning, she decided to go to John's parents and try to talk to them. Her goal was to get her daughter back at any cost. Early in the morning, she pulled up in a cab to John's parents' house. She pressed the doorbell, and it didn't take long for the answer to come. Someone came to the door, opened it, and looked at Julia questioningly. "Hello, I'm here to see Mallory and Jacob," Julia said. She wondered if the strange woman who answered the door was the Weasleys' new maid, or one of the other household helpers. "I'm sorry, you mean the Weasleys? They sold the house 6 months ago and moved out. We're the owners now, and we don't know the Weasleys' new address," the strange woman said. Julia apologized for the disturbance, walked away from the gate, sat down under the fence, and tried to figure out how she could find the Weasley family. After a while, she got up and went around to all the neighbors, hoping to find out some information about the Weasleys' new place of residence. But the Weasleys were not in the habit of talking to their neighbors. Consequently, none of the neighbors even knew that the Weasleys had moved here at all. That was the first day of Julia's vagabonding. She didn't have much money on her. If she spent it on a night in a hotel now, there would be no money left for the journey. So she decided to spend the night at the nearest train station. Early the next day, she arrived at John's office and waited for him in the parking lot. It wasn't hard to catch John. Julia saw his car and came running. It was the same Sarah who got out of the car first, then John. Julia's attempts to talk to John were fruitless. He pushed Julia away from him and quickened his stride, heading for the entrance to his office. Sarah watched sullenly, then snorted in his wake, and together they hid behind the glass door of the business center. After 3 days of such tossing around, Julia realized that it was useless to fight for her daughter. She herself was exhausted during this time. She was not used to living on the streets. Julia decided to get to the city, there to try to organize her life, to gain new strength, and with the help of a lawyer to get justice. Tired, battered, and shabby, Julia had a hard time getting to the bus station and boarding the train. A few years earlier, Mickey's family had suffered a great sorrow. His eldest son had lost his eyesight because of his mother, Casey's negligence. Thankfully, at the time, Grandma Selena was alive and well. She took the children to her and took care of them. Mickey then set a goal to do the operation at any cost and restore his son's sight before he went to school. But when he saved up the necessary amount of money, it turned out that Frederick had a whole bunch of other diseases that did not allow him to undergo the operation. Doctors advised to cure other diseases first, and then only to perform eye surgery. So Frederick will be late for school for at least 2 years. In the meantime, he has to attend a school for the blind. Selena prayed and dreamed that her grandson Frederick would finally regain his sight and become a full-fledged child. But by then, she herself was already on the brink. Her life was cut short by an unexpected stroke. Frederick and Ariana, who was so accustomed to their grandmother, suffered the most. They missed her terribly. Then Mickey took them to his house and found a good nanny. The nanny helped them with organizing their lives until Frederick's surgery. Fortunately, the surgery was a success. The very next day, Frederick opened his eyes very cautiously and saw his daddy Mickey and his little sister Ariana in front of him. There was no limit to his happiness. He had lived a blind life for more than 5 years. Now he had to reacquaint himself with his surroundings, and it was a process he was enjoying immensely. Frederick couldn't seem to get enough of the world. Mickey, too, was endlessly happy about it. He took a vacation to spend as much time as possible with his children. The single father and his 2 children walked in the parks from morning to night, exploring nature, drawing and learning about the world of colors. Mickey was very inspired by his deep experience of being a father. Amidst the inspiration, the idea came to him to take a family trip across the country. After a couple of days, he gathered his children and traveled by train to the Tumen region to explore the unseen mysteries of the domestic expanse. There they spent an exciting 14 days and seemed a little even tired of the experience. They were looking forward to finally getting on the train and starting to explore the new pictures outside the window again. Mickey and the 2 children were not far from Julia, who was already fast asleep from fatigue. The train had already moved off. Frederick and Ariana did not sit quietly for long. After a few minutes, Frederick's curiosity about the world awoke again. He stared wide-eyed at the scenery outside the windows and continued to ask his father questions. "Daddy, what color are the mountains?" "The mountains are dark blue or gray. It all depends on the specific area." "You say the mountains are dark blue, and your pants are dark blue too. But then why don't they look alike?" Frederick asked. "Because it's clothes, and there's mountains, nature." Ariana tried to appear omniscient and answered her brother's questions. "Daddy, what color is Auntie's suitcase?" Frederick asked again. "It's burgundy, son." "And burgundy is also pomegranate and tomato," Ariana added. "No, daughter. Pomegranate is scarlet. Tomatoes are red or pink." Mickey patiently explained to his children. "I get it. Pink is like paint on this aunt's lips," Frederick said. He came close to Julia and almost poked his finger into her lips. If Julia had heard the annoying talk before, she opened her eyes abruptly and raised her head. Her body was shattered with fatigue. Her head ached, and she really wanted to sleep in this position for at least an hour. But this boy had turned his full attention to Julia and was asking his father about every detail of her clothes. Julia herself didn't notice how she had flared up at one point. "Man, maybe you can calm your child down. He asks too many questions. At this age, he should know a lot and certainly control his behavior in society," she said. Mickey clearly didn't like that remark. "Lady, don't be rude. You don't know anything about my son, and I won't let anyone make any remarks about him," said Mickey. "It's worse for you. Your son will grow up to be a rude bore." Julia didn't recognize herself in her emotions. "My son has recently started to see the world. Before that, he was blind. He is only in his second month of exploring his surroundings with his eyesight. I am doing my best to keep him looking at the world with an exploratory eye," Mickey said, and switched to talking to his son. "And you probably don't have children of your own, so you don't know anything about this business," the older woman said toward Julia. "Don't worry, Grandma. I'm the best mother in the world, and I'll prove it. In the meantime, the fate of my child will be decided by an evil woman like you," Julia replied. "So rude," snorted the older woman and turned away to the window. "Where's the mother of your children? Isn't it hard for you to be a single father?" Another middle-aged woman approached Mickey. Mickey decided to ignore the curious questions of the others and continued talking to his children. But Julia was no longer able to control her emotions. She decided to answer instead of Mickey. Most likely his family survived the mother of those children, and now they are building the most caring relatives, Julia said, closed her eyes and pretended to be asleep. Mickey was confused. On the one hand, the lady had hit the mark. On the other hand, she wasn't quite right. So he decided to answer her. Society likes to blame men for not being involved enough in raising children. But even among mothers, there are unworthy ones who can leave their children in the middle of nowhere and quietly go on a long journey. Now, Mickey's words stick like an arrow into Julia's heart. For the past few days, Julia has been frantically trying to ward off the idea that she would be an unworthy mother if she left her daughter with her relatives and went away on her own, and then a complete stranger steps on her heartstrings. Young people, everything happens when you are young. Most importantly, if you sincerely love your family and do not betray yourselves in this love, then any hardships in life will be solved. It seems to me that you both have faced great adversity in your married life, and each of you blames the other. We don't know the whole situation, that may be the case, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is that you manage once again to find your strength and move on. Whether it is a direction to meet your family or from your family, let your hearts decide, said the elderly man with glasses. The rest of the way, they each thought about their own thoughts. Julia tried to imagine John in Mickey's place. Would he be able to care for his family as much as he did and protect it from outside attacks? Until recently, she believed that was the case, but it turned out not to be so at all. Mickey has realized from Julia's words that she has been forcibly deprived of her child and is depressed about it. He now tries to imagine Casey, who has never suffered much in her life for the sake of her children. At another station, the train stopped and passengers began to get off. Julia deliberately waited to be the last to get off. Wandering around in the unfamiliar area looking for a coffee machine, she found herself once again not far from Mickey and his children. They were picking out ice cream. "Hey Dad, you can't let kids eat ice cream in this weather. The kid's just out of surgery, so he needs to be careful of inflammation," Julia said and went on her way. Mickey did just that. He persuaded the children to give up ice cream and buy something else that wasn't cold. The children also clearly heard the words of the strange aunt and did not object. The train finally arrived at the final station. By this time, Julia had had enough sleep, and she felt energized. "Auntie, you have beautiful hair," said little Ariana to Julia, touching her hair with her little hands. Julia felt awful that her daughter had stayed somewhere else, while she was already in another city thousands of kilometers away. Ariana reminded her of Eve, who also admired her mother's hair and loved to mess with it for hours, trying to make it look nice. Julia looked at the girl silently, hugged her, and held her to her chest. At that moment, tears streamed from her eyes. She had barely contained her emotions for so many days, and now it seemed she no longer had the strength to control them. Mickey and Frederick looked at Julia and Ariana in surprise. "Don't cry, or your mascara will run out and smear all your makeup," Ariana said, and wiped Julia's tears away with her little hands. On the one hand, Julia was amused that this little princess was as knowledgeable about women's issues as her Eva was. On the other hand, when now she could see her daughter and hold her to her chest, would the Weasley family allow her to do that? "You'll forgive me for my emotions, I couldn't help myself." Julia said goodbye and looked at Mickey. "We all do. Which way are you going now?" Mickey asked. "I don't know yet. This is my first time in DC in the last 5 years. My parents live in a different area. I used to have friends, so I'll try to find them for the first time," Julia said. "Come with us. We have plenty of room in the apartment. You can rest and then start looking for your friends," Mickey suggested. "Auntie, come with us. I'll show you my makeup." "If you want, I'll do your hair," said little Ariana. Julia realized that she could not let go of this little girl, so she didn't resist the invitation to spend the night. It turned out that Mickey lived in a spacious and well-maintained apartment. Despite the absence of female hands, the apartment was perfectly clean and cozy. That night, Mickey ordered pizza. They had dinner together. The kids kept sharing their impressions and boring Julia with their questions. When it was time for bed, Mickey made Julia's bed in the living room. He himself went to tuck the kids into their rooms. The next morning, Julia intended to leave before the family woke up, but she didn't succeed. As soon as she tiptoed out of the bathroom, Ariana came running to her. "I promised you a beautiful hairdo. Let's do it now, shall we?" she suggested. Julia felt she could not refuse to let her little hands play with her hair for anything in the world. Her longing for her daughter was tearing at every fiber of her being. As much as Julia forced herself to leave early from the house of strangers, her soul did not want to part with Ariana. She promised herself that she would only make breakfast for the children and then leave to find her friends. When breakfast was ready, Ariana asked to stay and have breakfast together. At this time, the babysitter came to see them. Mickey sent the children for a walk with a nanny and started talking to Julia. "I can see you're having a hard time. What happened? What events have caused you to be so depressed?" Mickey asked. Julia told the whole story of her family life. Mickey realized that the girl was in a rather difficult situation and offered to help her with work. But Julia thanked him for his participation and refused to help. She kept hoping to find her friend Elizabeth, who had graduated from law school and was building a career in her specialty the last time they saw each other. Julia hoped to get some counseling from her friend and then think about setting up her life. Mickey walked her to the door and told her that if she didn't find her friend by tonight, she could go back to his apartment. Julia wandered around the city all day, trying to remember the address of Elizabeth's office, but the day ended without success. In the evening, it was necessary to return to Mickey's family again. The children, especially Ariana, was immensely happy to have Julia back. After a few days of empty attempts to find anyone she knew, Julia realized that she had been wrong to refuse Mickey's help in finding a job. She reminded him about it, and in 2 days, Julia's job search was solved successfully. She was hired by a company where Mickey's friend is the manager. Julia started working and continued to live in Mickey's apartment. She first offered some money for living expenses. Mickey ignored the question and said nothing. Her longing for her daughter was somewhat assuaged by Ariana. Frederick turned out to be a very sociable guy, so Julia quickly made friends with him. Julia got her first paycheck, and by that time she had looked for an apartment to rent. But before she moved in, she went to a lawyer for advice. He promised to help, but he had to drive her to the Tumen region at his own expense and pay a lot of additional expenses. All this requires additional time. The children accepted Julia's move with sadness. Julia promised to invite them to a housewarming party in the near future. The housewarming took place exactly 1 week later. Frederick and Ariana were sad that Julia didn't want to stay with them. They were even sadder that Daddy would soon go to work and would have little time for them. On one of the most ordinary days, Mickey called Julia and asked in an excited voice if Frederick and Ariana had come to see her. Julia was surprised because the children had definitely not come to see her. Mickey revealed that the children had left a note saying that they had gone to visit Julia. Julia wanted to take a cab and rush over to Mickey's house. But what would happen if the children came to her house while she was away? And the time was getting closer to evening. Mickey went to look for the children in the nearest neighborhood, while Julia waited for them at her house. A lot of time had passed, and there was no word from the kids. Mickey had to go to the police. The police were just looking for Mickey's contacts at the time. It turned out that Frederick and Ariana really decided to go to visit Julia, but on the way they got lost. They were found by the police and taken to the police station. When Mickey and Julia arrived at the police station, the time was well past midnight. After what had happened, Mickey decided to have a serious talk with Julia. Whereas before he had offered Julia a life together as help, now he was asking her for the sake of his children. He even promised to pay Julia just to keep his children happy, but Julia took offense at the offer to pay her money for company. She agreed to move back into Mickey's apartment. By that time, she realized that she had become attached to Ariana and missed her as much as she missed her daughter. Now Julia lives with Mickey and takes care of the children. The neighbors are already whispering that Mickey finally got married, and the new bride seems to be not bad. But Julia wasn't interested in a new relationship. She is still thinking day and night about how to take Eva back to her place. Meanwhile, Mickey was surprised to discover every day something new of a woman's real warmth and care for her family. It seemed to come so naturally to Julia. She easily found a common language with Mickey's children. She knew how to persuade them and pick up the right words. She enjoyed cooking delicious meals and was masterful at getting them ready to go out. In addition, Mickey had long ago noticed that Julia was quite good-looking. It was true that lately she had neglected her appearance a little, but Mickey had a clear idea of how stunning she would look if she gave herself some money and time. He decided to give her that treat. The following weekend, he gave Julia a certain amount of money and urged her to spend it on herself. Julia did so. In the evening, she returned home a refreshed young girl with a twinkle in her eye. Mickey realized that he could now gradually make steps toward winning Julia's favor, but he was very worried that his initiative to enter into a relationship might offend her. She had recently gone through a difficult breakup and was pining madly for her daughter. One night, when the children had gone to bed, Julia was talking about her daughter and showed Mickey a long-ago family photo. Mickey looked at the photo and was literally stunned. "So this is your ex-husband?" Mickey asked. "Do you know him?" Julia asked. A pleasant smile appeared on Mickey's face. "That's John. He studied finance and worked in a trading company while he was still a student, and he was also boxing at the time, going to a gym in the old Arbat neighborhood. Am I right?" Mickey asked. "That's right. That's when he and I first met and dated," Julia said. "Now give me his phone number," Mickey said. Julia dictated his phone number. Mickey wrote it down and said, "I can't promise you anything, but I'll try my best to talk to him." Julia didn't pay much attention to Mickey's words. What could he do from a distance? This matter can only be settled through the courts, she thought. Julia was preparing breakfast for the children when the doorbell rang. She looked through the peephole and saw a strange woman at the door. Julia opened the door. "Hello, who do you want?" Julia asked. "And good luck to you. And who are you?" The woman, who smelled a pungent odor of booze, looked indignantly at me. At this point, Mickey heard extraneous conversations and went to the door. The unfamiliar woman saw Mickey and immediately turned to attacking him. "Mickey, how could you let a strange woman into your house? Where are our children? The children need their own mother, not some strange woman. I want to see my children." A drunken Casey demanded to see her long-forgotten children in high tones. Despite Mickey's attempts to calm her down and send her back, she managed to make her way into the hallway of the apartment. Barely on her feet, Casey called her children by name, but Frederick and Ariana only looked out of their rooms and back shut themselves in there. Mickey managed to get Casey out with great difficulty. During this time, Julia managed to find out that the man for whom Casey left her children and her family had abandoned her long ago. Casey now has nowhere to live and no job. It was an amazing coincidence that it was during such a period that she remembered her children. However, there was still more to come. Casey now began to visit Mickey and Julia almost every day. The children absolutely refused to see the woman. They didn't even seem to remember her. But Casey continued to demand that Julie get out of here and vacate her apartment immediately. Attempts to peacefully negotiate and resolve the matter were unsuccessful. At one point, Julia felt genuinely sorry for Casey as a woman, but it was useless to talk to her about it. Then Julia decided to try a somewhat unconventional approach to solving the problem. From the family album, she took out some good photos of Casey and posted them on a dating site. There were quite a few offers. Julia carefully selected each of them to find a more or less suitable match for Casey. Julia honestly told all the men that she was looking for an easygoing man for her friend. From the candidate, she demanded serious intentions, a job and a great desire to meet a girl with whom you can live your life without much worry. And there were quite a few of them. Julia gave Casey's phone number to a few selected candidates and strictly warned that the bride did not know about the dating site and the efforts of her mysterious friend. For potential candidates, it did not prove to be a problem. After 3 days, Mickey's apartment was quiet. There was no more banging on the door or drunken debauches on the landing. Julia realized that it was likely that one of the potential candidates had found a way to approach Casey. But Mickey didn't know the whole story and was worried sick trying to think of a solution to Casey's attacks. Julia left him alone with these worries so as not to seem too resourceful. On one of the usual days towards evening, Mickey called Julia and asked her to come home early. He promised that there would be a surprise waiting for her at home. Julia thought that surely Mickey must have bought something or wanted to give her money for shopping and salons again. What was her surprise when, after coming home from work, she opened the door to Mickey's apartment and saw her Eve in the living room. She couldn't believe her eyes. It turned out that Eva had missed her mom a lot too. They were sitting in each other's arms right on the floor and couldn't get enough of each other. Only then did Julia become curious as to how Mickey had managed to get her daughter. Mickey only smiled enigmatically and promised to tell her everything at the family dinner. I was walking home from practice one day and noticed that in the darkness behind the garages 2 big guys were beating up one guy. The victim was almost unconscious. He had no strength left to resist or beg for mercy. The bullies were beating him brutally. I decided to stand up for this guy. I managed to quickly calm the 2 men down so that they ran away in the darkness, blazing their heels. The guy had already lost a lot of blood and was lying half dead, so I took him to the hospital, and a couple days later he came to. By that time, even his parents had arrived. I visited him a couple times, just for humanity's sake. Then his parents thanked me immensely and offered to ask me anything I wanted from them. Like an honorable man, I didn't ask for anything and just disappeared from these people's lives. But I do remember John's face. After I was discharged from the hospital, he found me and bought me a couple of beers. That was the end of our acquaintance. So the other day, I called his parents and reminded them of the thanks they wanted to give me years ago. I told them the truth, and asked them to give Eva away. So today, John brought Eve himself. I promised the Weasleys that I myself would personally take care of their granddaughter as my daughter. Eve will be a sister to Ariana. All that's left is to get you to agree, Mickey told Julie. Julia thought for a moment that everything was happening as if in a dream. When Ariana and Eva hugged her from both sides, she realized that this was not a dream, but the real life she deserved. If I understand correctly, did you just propose to me? Julia turned to Mickey. Mickey only smiled back. Well, then I mean to consult with the people who are important to me, Julia said. Then she turned to the children and asked, Frederick, Ariana, and Eva, are you ready to be brothers and sisters to each other and call Mickey and me Mom and Dad? Asked Julia. Yes, the children answered with glee. If the most important people say yes, how can I say no? Then I'll say yes too, Julia said. A couple of weeks later, Mickey and Julia were officially married. There were no more marital problems along the way. Maybe it was because they had paid a high price for happiness in advance.
After dropping her son off at her mother-in-law's house, Jeanette froze when she overheard her conversation with her neighbor. And having taken a DNA test, Caleb sent Valerie an air kiss goodbye and started the car with a sense of complete satisfaction. He was very pleased. His light-hearted romance had grown into something more. Caleb had been thinking for almost a month now that he felt much better with Valerie than he did with his wife. If it weren't for his son, he probably would have confessed everything to Jeanette by now to set the record straight. But there was one thing that made him very uncomfortable. Jeanette and Caleb had a good life by modern standards. They both had small businesses. The man owned a car repair shop, and his wife ran a dry cleaning shop. They also had a nice house, and each had a car. So financially, they were both making good money and didn't have much trouble. At first, Caleb liked that Jeanette was a serious person. Even then, she was already taking her first steps in business. Her dry cleaning was a tiny place in one of the basements, but over time the woman had grown quite well. And with the scale, as it seemed to Caleb, somewhere flew away in his wife's femininity. 3 years ago, the husband could not stand it and made a very rash decision for himself. He was not embarrassed by the fact that even a brief affair constituted adultery. Well, what am I supposed to be crazy about now? Caleb said to himself at the time. I want a normal woman around me, not a robot. That's what he used to call Jeanette. Of course, his wife was not a robot, but her life was in fact subject to a certain schedule. In addition to work, she had to deal with domestic issues and her son. Daniel was in the 3rd grade, and his hobbies and interests took up a large part of his life and consequently of his mother's life. Caleb tried not to interfere. All that said, he was involved with his son from time to time, but more he was disappearing somewhere, either with friends or with his mistress. Jeanette was so absorbed in her own affairs that she didn't notice that she and her husband were less and less likely to go out or spend time together. Apart from shared holidays and birthdays and summer holidays, they had almost forgotten when they just sat and talked. Caleb himself often said he had things to do. That's not to say Jeanette ignored her husband completely, but it seemed to Caleb that he felt much better in someone else's house and bed than he did in his own. A dangerous misconception the man hadn't yet realized. Something must be done about it, he said aloud. Valerie, I will never leave. Divorce I'm not afraid of. Jeanette will take half the property. Whether she'll let me communicate with Daniel is the question. Though I don't really care about that. In recent months, Caleb had grown increasingly cold toward Daniel. He'd once thought what he'd done would be best for both of them. But now his son was beginning to annoy him. The boy wanted to talk to him now and then. And Caleb was cut off. He looked at him and understood. The phone rang and he answered it. Jeanette told him she was going to take Daniel to his mother's house. It was Saturday. Jeanette, I'll probably be late tonight, her husband replied calmly. We're in the middle of a workshop. If you need anything, call me. He glanced at the clock. It was nearly 12 o'clock. He could have stayed late at Valerie's, of course, but that provoked some pain in him, He wanted to drop everything and marry his mistress. And to do that, he had to decide to divorce his wife. On the one hand, Caleb was ready for it, but on the other hand, there was still fear in him. What will she do to me? He reasoned. If I don't love her anymore, is that a crime? Of course, in a man's eyes, it was no crime. And he was not going to plunge into philosophy, much less into religious speculation. He hadn't killed a man, so everything else was okay. Caleb decided to go to his old friend. He had lived out of town for a long time. The man remembered how everyone made fun of him at school. Edwin was going to become first a gynecologist, then an obstetrician. Everyone who was not lazy made obscene jokes in his direction. But as it turned out later, Edwin became a very good specialist, and 5 of his classmates gave birth with him. About a year ago, he suddenly left the practice, said he was tired. Caleb had met him about 4 months ago and was amazed at how much his life had changed. Caleb, hello mate, rejoiced the host. Come in. He opened the wicket door wide open. Edwin had divorced his wife back when he was still working as an obstetrician. Or rather, she had left him when Edwin was a normal man, as Caleb called him. He made a good living and enjoyed taking gifts. He was approached by the rich for help. Edwin also helped Caleb, for which he thanked him very well. But the doctor's wife was not enough. She drove an expensive car, holidaying abroad while Edwin worked, took great risks. He did not cheat on her, although he lived a well-to-do life. But after the doctor learned that his wife had a lover, it was as if his life was cut short. Yeah, look at you, screamed Leslie in his face. You're a loser. Anyone else in your position would be a head doctor by now and making decent money. Leslie, don't you have enough? Edwin looked at his wife in amazement. Why, you live like a queen. It's not like you don't need anything. What nonsense are you talking? She stood her ground. I want a flat in Dubai, a new car. I'm ashamed to be driving a wreck like this. Edwin had spoiled his wife so much that she had reached the point of extreme insolence. She tried to blame her adultery on her unhappy husband, who took bribes and good gifts to provide for her. But the divorce was scandalous. Leslie tried to vilify her ex-husband as best she could. Naturally, she also used in her game and daughter. She immediately declared that he would never see her. For almost a year, the doctor went crazy, and then a strange idea came into his head. I want to give it all up, he said to himself. Move into our country house. Let everyone leave me alone. So he did. The final issues with the division of property were finalized, and Edwin secluded himself in the middle of nowhere. He took up yoga and spiritual development, created his own website, and gave counseling on women's health issues. He had enough to live on, and he was happy about that. But it took a long time to recover from the lifestyle Edwin had previously led. A lot of that had to do with Caleb as well. And changed your life dramatically, in general, Edwin wondered at his former classmate. Well, you have. I can assure you that I feel much better now, he smiled. I'm never going back to my old life. Well, what about helping children be born into the world? His guest immediately asked him. Isn't that a worthy mission? Not in this day and age, he sighed. Unfortunately, the system will break even a man with the purest of intentions. As long as everything can be bought and sold, there will be no honest doctors. We don't have free medicine. People still can't understand that. You still need to put money in someone's pocket or thank them. It would be better if the services were paid. Then it would at least be fair, Edwin said. Oh, come on, Caleb laughed. You wouldn't live on your penny salary. Besides, how many people have you helped, including me? Do you know how much I regret it now? Caleb stared intently into his eyes. What I did was a crime. Caleb felt like the old Edwin was dead. A complete stranger sat before him. The man shuddered. He was uncomfortable in this company. Somehow the conversation was not flowing. And Caleb, citing that he was busy, was going home. It was good to see you. Caleb shook Edwin's hand in farewell. May everything work out for you. Thank you, the man smiled. Good luck to you too, he replied without much enthusiasm. Caleb had wanted so badly to talk to his old friend straight, to tell him about Valerie. But now he realized clearly that Edwin would be out of his life forever. Idiot, he muttered to himself under his breath. to trade such prospects to stand upside down. Yoga helped him come to his senses. He chuckled. Yeah, wait for it. You just had a phase shift. Caleb couldn't understand his friend for many reasons, and the main one was that Jeanette had never cheated on him. He couldn't even imagine the pain of that. What didn't bother the man was how she would feel after he informed her of his mistress. His mood had soured. Somewhere inside, he also felt that Edwin was right about something. They shouldn't have started this whole thing, especially now that he wanted to divorce Jeanette. The baby was only getting in his way. Jeanette came out of the dry cleaners. She worked 7 days a week. The girls rotated shifts. Over the years, her small business had already developed a reputation, so Jeanette no longer had to prove anything to anyone. Now she just had to keep things running. It was much harder to keep her customers than it was to find them. Maintaining high standards wasn't for everyone. Despite the fact that Jeanette had been in the business for many years, there was always plenty of work. When the girl met Caleb, he hinted to her a couple of times that a wife should stay at home and watch over the family hearth. But Jeanette immediately made him realize that she is not going to sit on his neck. And in time, her decision proved to be the right one. Even the birth of a child did not make her give up her small business, and the work did not give her boredom. She didn't have time for silly arguments with her husband. Jeanette made sure Daniel got into the car, started it, turned around, and headed toward her mother-in-law. It had to be said that Caleb's parents kept out of their lives. They loved Daniel, so every once in a while a woman would bring them a grandson. "Mum, just don't stay too long," the boy asked. "I don't want to sit up at their house until night. Grandfather will make me play cards again. And you know how I don't like them." "All right, I promise to be quick," Mum smiled. "Daniel, maybe we can go out tomorrow. It's been a while since we've gone anywhere." "Dad has tomorrow off." "Yes," cheered the son. "He promised me he'd play with me. We need to finish our Lego city." Deal, Jeanette replied and sank into herself. Her son asked her questions from time to time. The neighbors of the premises were about to move out, and Jeanette was trying hard to figure out if she needed to expand her company. The dry cleaning business was certainly thriving. Many people had small washing machines in their homes, which was one of the reasons they were called upon. There were also quite a few wealthy people in town who wore quality brand name clothes. Many models could not be washed in water. Dry cleaning was required. Carpets were particularly popular. It was for the latter that she wanted to expand her space a bit. "We should get some," Jeanette decided to herself about the neighboring shop, especially since a few people have already come to look at it. "I'll drop Daniel off and call the landlord. We've been working with him for years, so he shouldn't be able to turn me down." The car stopped outside a small house and Daniel reluctantly got out. Jeanette's mother-in-law immediately appeared outside the yard. "Come in," she said friendly. "Let's have some tea," Mrs. Lillian suggested. "You'll excuse me, but I can't right now. I'll sit at your place tonight when I come to pick up Daniel," the daughter-in-law promised. She jumped into the car and drove to work. On the way, she dialed the owner of the room she was renting. He asked her to come over in an hour. It took her until almost 12 noon to get her affairs in order. It was 5:40, and the woman decided to go straight to pick up Daniel. Arrived a little earlier than she had promised her son and mother-in-law. Walked into the house just as she expected. There was a grandfather sitting on the floor playing cards with his grandson. "Good evening," she said hello. "And where is Mrs. Lillian?" "Yes, in the vegetable garden. Perhaps she has gone to her neighbors, Jeanette." "Call her home," replied the father-in-law. The guest headed for the vegetable garden. She knew that Caleb's parents had, so to speak, a secret entrance, a small gate through which one could get into the neighbor's yard. An old lady lived there, with whom her father-in-law and mother-in-law had been friends for many years. Jeanette realized that Mrs. Lillian was probably at her place. The woman was nowhere to be found in the vegetable garden. So the daughter-in-law went to the wicket. Behind it, the neighbor's shed began immediately. Jeanette heard voices. She had a few meters to go to open the wicket. "Which one, Mrs. Judy? It's hard to say. We love Daniel, as if he were our own grandson," a familiar voice reached her. Jeanette froze. Her heart was pounding so hard she feared it was about to jump out. "Well, where's their son?" "He's sick, isn't he?" "I don't think anyone wants him," the old woman said. "Well, yes, he has cerebral palsy. Not in the most severe form, but still," Mrs. Lillian replied. Everything whirled round in front of Jeanette's eyes. She crouched down on a large stone that lay right next to the wicket. "Probably lives like that in an orphanage for invalids," continued her mother-in-law. "Sometimes my heart aches so much for him. It's a shame about the baby, of course, but Caleb didn't want him. What could we do?" "Judge not, lest ye be judged," whispered the neighbor. "Lillian, nobody knows, maybe it was all for the good." "All right, Mrs. Judy, I'll go," came the voice of the mother-in-law. And Jeanette jumped up from the stone like a scalded woman and ran swiftly to the exit of the vegetable garden. "Mrs. Lillian, where are you?" shouted Mrs. Jeanette, barely holding back her tears. Her mother-in-law came out of the neighbor's wicket and headed towards her with a smile. She immediately noticed Jeanette's pale face. "Yes, my stomach hurts something," she lied. "That's why I came early to pick up Daniel." "Of course, go home," Mrs. Lillian worried. "Let me pack him up." 5 minutes later, Jeanette was driving her son home and crying loudly. And Daniel didn't understand what was happening to his mom. "Son." "It's okay," she wiped her tears away with her hand. "There's just one problem, but I'll be sure to solve it." Jeanette couldn't eat. Jeanette sat and looked at Daniel. No doubt she loved him. He was her baby. But what she had heard today was fundamentally life-changing. "I can't do that," Jeanette whispered. "We need to talk to Caleb. He's our son. And I'm also very curious about where Daniel came from," she thought. But that evening her husband arrived late, as luck would have it. Jeanette took a sedative and went to bed. She didn't even hear her husband come home. The next day was the hardest day of her life. Everyone was home, and Jeanette realized she couldn't keep quiet. She approached Caleb and asked him to come into the kitchen. "I know everything," she said quietly, and cried. Her husband stood in utter amazement. Caleb couldn't understand who had told Jeanette about Valerie. The man stood silent. He was thinking about how to start off right now. "You don't want to tell me everything yourself?" stared intently into his wife's eyes. "I am miffed, husband, but there was nowhere to go." "Jeanette, I've wanted to tell you this for a long time." "Yes, I have another," he blurted out quickly. Jeanette stared at him in horror. For the first few seconds she thought she was watching some kind of film. "You have a mistress," she barely uttered. Caleb, her voice shook. "But we have a family," Jeanette questioned. "Jeanette, we're adults," he replied coldly. "Yes, there was a time I loved you. But then I met Valerie. And our son," the woman tried to piece things together. "Him and her son." Everything jumbled in Jeanette's mind. "What does this have to do with Daniel?" he exclaimed. "Jeanette, let's not make a big deal out of this. I'm filing for divorce. We'll divide everything fairly. I have no claim on you whatsoever." "Caleb, are you kidding? After all, this is all a prank." "No," he replied angrily. "Jeanette, I don't want to live with you mercilessly." Her husband plunged the knife into her heart. Everything swirled before the woman's eyes, and she fainted from overexertion. "Oh shit," Caleb swore and rushed to her, started slapping his wife's cheeks. Caleb lifted her in his arms, laid her on the couch. Jeanette opened her eyes, everything in front of her spinning. Caleb brought her some cold water and some sedative drops. Daniel was scared too. He looked at his mother with mad eyes and cried. Jeanette tried to get up but couldn't. It took her an hour to regain full consciousness. Daniel was sleeping next to her. Caleb wasn't home. God, I can't understand anything, Jeanette thought as she opened her eyes. This time she managed to get up, put the kettle on. Didn't want to wake her son. Apparently the boy had been under a lot of stress. His body had exhausted itself and he was fast asleep. So I've got two problems now. The first is Caleb's infidelity and divorce. And the second is Daniel. Or rather, my real son. She couldn't calm down. Her husband returned late. Jeanette didn't call him and throw a tantrum. She had already accepted the idea that Caleb had cheated on her. Now she was more concerned about her sick son and what had happened to him. Jeanette prepared herself for another difficult conversation. It was almost 10 when the door opened. "I'm getting my things," her husband said immediately. "Jeanette, I don't want to muse on all this. What happened is what happened. We're adults, and we should understand everything." "Caleb, let your adultery remain on your conscience," she replied calmly. "That's not what I'm interested in. What does this Valerie have to do with our child?" "Nothing," he answered quickly. "And the things are in the bag. Valerie and I have no children." "Then tell me where our baby is." Jeanette grabbed his arm. "I know all about it. I heard about it from your mother. Daniel is not our son." She finally uttered the hardest part. "You mean you meant it when you said it?" Caleb turned pale. "And now it all falls into place. But so be it. I'm still glad you found out about Valerie and me." "I'm not interested in your Valerie," or you replied his wife, barely containing herself. "Caleb, I demand that you tell me where my son is." "How do I know?" He wiped the sweat from his face. "Stayed at the hospital. What do you want me to say?" "That you had serious problems during labor, and that the boy was born sick. That I was trying to protect you then so you wouldn't suffer for the rest of your life." Caleb asked. "Where is my baby?" Jeanette screamed. "How dare you decide for me? I hate you. Do you hear me? I hate you for this. Never will I forgive you." "I'm telling you again, I don't know where that kid is," Caleb raged. "That's it. Leave me alone. You can sue me for loving you and wanting you to be a happy mother." "Where is my son?" Jeanette covered her face with her hands and cried. "Give him to me for part of him." Her husband tried to speak to her more calmly. "He had no hope. He is an invalid for life." The woman answered him nothing. She left for the kitchen, closing the door behind her. The husband left without saying goodbye. "I will definitely find him," she promised someone. "I'll take my child. I'll treat him." Almost all night Jeanette did not sleep. And towards morning her body couldn't take it and she fell into a deep sleep. She woke up to Daniel waking her up. "Mum, am I not going to school today?" he asked when she opened her eyes. "Son, what time is it?" Jeanette grumbled and glanced at the clock. 7:40. "Let's get ready quickly. Come on, let's get dressed. I'll make breakfast." Daniel was a little late that day, but he wasn't worried about that. The important thing was that his mum was just as she had been before. No more crying, though the dark circles under her eyes said she wasn't feeling well. Jeanette walked her son to the gate, got in the car, put her head on the steering wheel and cried. "I'll stop by the dry cleaners, then I'll go home. I need a couple of hours sleep so I can do some searching." She made a plan for herself. The car started slowly. Jeanette's mind was reeling with the words of her husband. She realized that if it hadn't been for their real son, she would have had a very difficult divorce, and she didn't know if she would have survived it at all. Caleb had always seemed to her not only a husband, but a friend she could trust. But now he had lied to her, and at least twice. And they weren't simple matters, they were situations that directly applied to Jeanette. God, but if Caleb has proven to be so unreliable, then what about other men? She uttered aloud. What was he lacking? Love and care. After all, that's what they usually say. Somehow homebodies who are willing to sit with their husbands any spare minute. Cheating doesn't go around either. Then it's all a lie. If he had honestly told me he was fed up with me, it would have been much more honest, Jeanette thought as she drove up to work, but decided to sit in the car for a few more minutes. He's met his woman, she laughed. What am I then? Not his, am I? Wasn't that what he was saying to me? So men can have many women of their own. She got out of the car. Complete nonsense. Lust is the real reason. When a man is doing well and has no problems, that's when he shows his true colors. Caleb's just a womanizer. Behind the thick layer of noble man's makeup he threw in my eyes, he always hid an inability to control his flesh. Hike, cool man, Jeanette thought. She had made up her mind that she wasn't going to work things out with her husband, nor complain to anyone about him cheating on her. She had Daniel, who she wanted to live for. And now that she found out about her real boy, she had even more strength. It didn't bother Jeanette at all that he was sick. She woke up to her alarm clock ringing. It was almost 11. The woman felt rested. Daniel was staying after school at an after-school care center, so she could mind her own business. The first thing Jeanette did was go to the maternity ward. She knew that the obstetrician who delivered her baby was a classmate of Caleb's. Basically, he'd introduced them. One day her husband mentioned that he was no longer in practice. Jeanette didn't call Caleb to ask him about it. At the maternity hospital, she was told that Edwin was no longer working. When asked how she could find him, the nurse shrugged and said he lived somewhere out of town. "Okay," Jeanette whispered. "Thanks for your help." She smiled at the girl and quickly ran downstairs. She decided to act differently. The first few years together, they had a good relationship with another of Caleb's classmates. She was a police officer, so her husband valued the acquaintance. Jeanette had come to New York to study. She came from a small town near Florida, so she had no acquaintances here except a few classmates from the institute. Jeanette walked into the police station and quickly found Nicole. She was busy, so she had to wait a while. "Nicole," Hi said, an old acquaintance. "How are you?" She smiled affably. The women got to talking. Jeanette hadn't told Nicole that she and Caleb were facing a divorce. "Yeah, he's still working at his auto repair shop," the same way the guest smiled. "So it's business as usual for us." "What do you need Edwin for?" "Oh, and Caleb probably knows where he lives," Nicole wondered. "You understand, I'm having female problems. I don't want my husband to find out. I want to consult Edwin. It's a shame he left the maternity ward. He's a doctor from God." "I understand," she sighed. "I've been having trouble getting pregnant with my second since Nora. There's so much stress at work. Oh, I don't even want to talk about it," she waved her hand. Nicole told Jeanette how to get to Edwin's house. The woman fluttered like a butterfly. Her obstetrician doctor was the master key that would open the door to her son. But as soon as Jeanette pulled up in front of the doctor's house, she was struck with an intense fear. She began to fear that she would fail. What will I do then? What will Daniel say was the first time such a thought had entered her head? How will I explain to him the arrival of a disabled boy, and how will he feel about it? Her mother's heart clenched. Jeanette had so many questions that she didn't know the answers to. "I can handle it," she said loudly to herself. That's what a woman always did in difficult situations, though. Gaining a full chest of air, she pressed the bell. To distract herself, she looked at the small house and manicured yard. Not long after, but a familiar face appeared on the street. Edwin looked at Jeanette in some amazement. He recognized her immediately. Jeanette smiled. He said hello and waited to see what his guest would say to him. "Edwin, we need to have a serious talk," she said. The man's face changed immediately. It seemed to him that he had guessed the topic of conversation. "Come in," he offered, closed the wicket, and escorted his guest into the house. Jeanette felt at once how easy it was to breathe a pleasant scent hit her nose. The furnishings were simple, but the many plants made it cozy. Edwin quickly brought 2 glasses of cold water from the kitchen. Jeanette saw that lemon and mint were visible at the bottom. "Delicious," she pronounced, taking a couple of sips. "Edwin, I want to say at once that I don't blame you for anything." She fell silent. The master, too, was silent. It was very important to him that the woman finally spoke up. "I don't even know where to begin." Tears ran down Jeanette's cheeks. "I found out yesterday that Daniel is not our son." Edwin stood up. He was looking out the window. "I've wanted to be free of this burden for so long. I don't know why I went for it," he pronounced. "Perhaps I was afraid I would be accused of medical malpractice and hang the case on me." "Edwin, I don't blame you for anything. You may have had your motive," she tried to speak calmly. "Besides, you paid me very well." "You didn't know that," then he sighed. "Money mattered a lot to me." Then Jeanette finished the rest of her drink. The mint and lemon seemed to ease her nerves. At least she felt calmer. Edwin came back to her, sat down in the chair opposite, hesitated a moment, and continued his story. Apparently the boy had some musculoskeletal problems. He looked at Jeanette. "Not everything can be determined through ultrasound. I see it this way. The labor aggravated the condition and the nerves of the muscles. causing permanent damage to the bones. Could he have been helped? Looked up a former doctor to the guest. I don't know, he admitted frankly, before he was taken to a home for disabled children. An examination showed that he needed very expensive treatment. Naturally, the state wasn't going to bother with him. Edwin, the baby was sick in the womb. It was not my fault, but it would have been very difficult to prove. There are real cases where a child gets cerebral palsy due to a doctor's fault. But I did the right thing this time. Edwin generally lowered his head, as he always did. Jeanette covered her face with her hands and cried. She realized that if she had been told then that her son was an invalid, it would have been very hard for her to bear. Now she was ready. But in those days, Jeanette was not yet distinguished for her wisdom or fortitude. Where did Daniel come from? She finally calmed down. He has parents. Jeanette held her breath. No, his mother died in childbirth. You and she gave birth on the same day, he replied. A disadvantaged woman was brought to us. She had nothing. The labor was very difficult. The baby was born healthy, and she died the next day. I see, Jeanette said detachedly. Edwin, where they took him, you know that, don't you? Yes. They've put him in a residential home for the disabled. Jerome is his maternal name. Jeanette could not help herself again. Son. God, I wish he were alive. Perhaps someone adopted him. Not likely. The landlord objected at once. Healthy children are not wanted. And here, do you think people dream of fiddling with the sick? Edwin felt a sense of relief in his soul. It had been so many years since he'd been able to shed that weight. Why did Caleb go for it? The visitor said aloud. After all, whatever he is his father. Jeanette, it's not that simple. The man stepped up to her. Perhaps he was thinking of you at the time. I'm sorry, but why didn't he tell you that? I've had that question running around in my head this whole time, because she wanted to answer quickly but stopped herself because he's Edwin. We're filing for divorce. Caleb has a mistress. He's gone to her. Edwin looked at her in bewilderment. When a former friend had visited him the other day, he hadn't said anything to him about it. I'm sorry, he said with concern. Jeanette, how are you going to pull 2 kids by yourself? It's okay, I'll manage. I'll take my son, the woman said firmly. Edwin, I'm not leaving him in an orphanage. I'm going to do everything I can to fix him. She left, and Edwin sank into himself. In fact, he was glad that all this had finally come to light. He closed his eyes and remembered those last days when he was still working at the hospital. But you know I'll pay you well. The mayor's aide glared at the obstetrician. You just tell her the baby was stillborn. Of course, powerful people often went to him. Edwin had a good reputation as a professional doctor. But after he was good at delivering their wives' or mistresses' babies, getting handsome fees for it, the requests became more and more monstrous. Years after Edwin had switched Caleb's son with the son of homeless men, he was approached by the deputy mayor. Belinsky had changed his mind and decided to get rid of his mistress's child. Either that or she was up to something behind his back and wanted to claw back some of his property. In general, the man came to the doctor and began to beg him, and then blackmail him. Well, is your work not good enough? He threw angrily when Edwin disagreed. You know it's enough for me to snap my finger. Click, Edwin told him, and that same day he wrote his resignation letter. It was incredible news. No one had ever expected Edwin to quit. In fact, he was ready for it. After his divorce, he wasn't in the best shape to deliver babies and operate. He sighed. Would he want to go back into practice again? At first? Very much. Now he doesn't. He was drawn in other directions. Despite his many years in formal medicine, Edwin became increasingly interested in alternative methods. And he was pleasantly surprised by the results. The doctor completed several courses of aromatherapy, was fond of healing therapy, medicinal plants. You need official medicine for emergencies, he thought. But when it comes to chronic illnesses, it is vastly inferior to unconventional methods. Yoga and essential oils helped Edwin get rid of the runny nose he was suffering from. He also got rid of his high blood pressure, which was a result of his body's unaccustomed work schedule. All in every way the man liked his current life. Not to say that he had a lot of clients, but those who wanted to return health, especially when they were abandoned by official medicine, were becoming more and more. Were Edwin's patients successful? Definitely yes. The man made an individual program for each case. And since he was approached by women with many different diseases, his experience was expanding, you could say every day. Endometriosis, myomas, and other incurable diseases in official medicine were giving up their positions. There were already 2 cases of complete cure. However, 80% of his clients noticed an improvement. Edwin felt responsible for Jeanette and Caleb's baby. I realized I should have got Jeanette's phone number. I'll look for that boy with her, the thought occurred to him. At first, Edwin wanted to call his former friend, but since the situation was very complicated, he didn't risk it. I'll go and see her myself tomorrow, he decided. We'll go to the orphanage together. Jeanette drove home in utter exhaustion. She felt like a squeezed lemon. During that half-hour conversation with Edwin, it was as if the woman had lost all her strength. I don't care what Caleb thinks there. Especially since we are no longer husband and wife, she said. I'll take my baby. That night, Jeanette realized it wasn't that simple. She picked up her son from after-school care. Daniel was cranky, wanting to see his daddy. Son, he's away on a business trip. His mother didn't know what to tell him. Then have him call me, the child pleaded. I miss him already. We never went anywhere yesterday. Jeanette couldn't figure out how she was going to cope with something that wasn't up to her. Only now did she realize that Daniel was under attack. What also confused her about the whole situation was that Caleb hadn't talked to her about Daniel. I'll find Jerome first, then I'll explain everything to Daniel. She tried to find a way out. And what am I going to tell him? That Dad won't be living with us anymore. That he has another family now. She couldn't sleep for a long time. The mess in her head kept her awake. She went back and forth from one thought to another. But they were cut off in an instant, and it was as if she were falling back into the void. In this delirium, Jeanette lay almost until morning. She did not realize that she had finally fallen asleep. Caleb, but if he's not your son, then what's the problem? Edwina stroked her lover's hair gently. She won't be able to file for child support. Take a DNA test, he sighed. I don't even know. I thought of Daniel as my son for so many years. Sure, inside I knew he wasn't my own, but I grew attached to him. But why would you think about him when you're about to have a daughter? And believe me, she really is your girl. Perfectly healthy, the girl stroked her belly. Valerie. Yes, I don't doubt you, he kissed his mistress. There will be no alimony for nothing. Do you hear me? She said more sternly. I don't want our money going to a stranger's child. Caleb didn't sleep. He kept thinking about what Valerie had told him. He hadn't felt much love for Daniel lately, but showing the DNA results in court and saying he wouldn't pay child support on him, even in Caleb's mind, would have been mean. But Valerie wasn't about to back down. She didn't want any competition. When she found out that Daniel wasn't Caleb's son, she knew immediately that she had him in her pocket now. She'd done everything she could to make him completely cold to his wife, and now she was trying to wrestle him away from his non-native son as well. What am I going to tell her? I'm sorry, but this isn't our child, he thought. After all, Jeanette doesn't even know the children were switched, because I did it. With Edwin's help, of course. But it was my initiative. In short, Caleb had backed himself into a corner. To tell Jeanette that Daniel wasn't his son, and he wasn't going to pay child support, would have looked very cynical and inhuman. Valerie could see her lover's doubts. It seemed to her that a little more pushing was needed. Caleb, I suggest you don't drag this conversation out too long, she pressed against him. Talk to her, tell her we're about to have a daughter. After all, she's a mother too and should understand me. I can't do that to her, the man resisted. It's not like I'm a pig, he threw angrily. Caleb, do you want me to leave? She sobbed. I don't want her baby. Can you understand that? I want my family to be happy. Valerie defiantly clutched her stomach. Caleb, startled, ran up to her. Valerie, what's wrong with you? There's going to be a miscarriage. I promise you'll talk to her, Valerie demanded. But okay, he said. Please just calm down. Breathe like this, Valerie. I love you. Can't you see that? Caleb, did I look forward to our child so much if I didn't love you? She said through her tears. Why did I take such a risk then and go out with a married man? As much as Caleb felt that he shouldn't behave like this, he still obeyed Valerie's wishes. He decided to have a serious talk with Jeanette. Jeanette dropped her son off at school and went straight to the orphanage. At the mere sight of him, everything turned over in her mind. God, she could barely hold herself together. Give me strength, the woman went straight to the director. You haven't even seen him, she threw angrily. This is how they remember their sick children years later and think they can take them away easily. No, I don't think it would be easy, replied the visitor. But that I'll take him away, that's for sure. She kept her eyes on the woman. He's a recumbent. Can you understand that? I didn't want to agree to see the headmistress. You smile at him now, and then you'll be out of his life forever. And he will suffer. I want to see my child, and I demand that you allow me to take a DNA test, Jeanette said coldly. Wow. Demand she does, the woman laughed. I'm the mistress here. It's up to me. When you gave your son to the orphanage, you demanded it too, didn't you? No, Jeanette replied. She realized she couldn't tell the whole story. If you don't show me my child, I will demand visitation through the courts. Okay, said the principal fearfully. You'll have 5 minutes. I think that will be enough time for you to decide that you will not come here again. I'll never decide for myself, the visitor threw angrily and followed the woman. Jeanette realized that this meeting would be hard on her. She had long ago drawn in her mind the boy lying on the bed. His arms were shriveled, his mouth wouldn't close, so it was constantly leaking saliva. His eyes were always staring at the ceiling, and there was no clarity in them. The headmistress stopped at some door, cast an angry glance at her guest and opened it. Entered first. After a few minutes, she asked Jeanette to come in as well. Jeanette entered the room on trembling legs. There were 4 children in the room. On one bed near the window was a blonde-haired boy. The guest knew immediately that it was him, although there were 3 other children present. Jerome was looking out the window. His body did not move. He could only turn his head and work his hands a little. He turned round and cast a glance at the stranger. She was staring at him intently. I can hand out the guests to the children, she addressed the principal. The latter nodded grudgingly. Jeanette gave small bags of goodies. 2 of the children had typical signs of cerebral palsy. They made strange noises. Another boy couldn't even turn his head. Jerome, these are for you. Jeanette walked over to the bed. Sorry, I didn't know what you liked out of sweets. The boy looked at her intently. Jeanette could barely hold herself together. His gaze seemed to reach to the very depths of her heart. Thank you, he said quietly. I don't care. Only now did Jeanette notice how much he looked like her father. His eyes, his hair, his smile gave him away as Caleb Jr. Her guest helped him unwrap his candy, peel an orange, before she even realized that her meeting with her son had taken place. Time. Gotta go, the principal's order was heard. She walked up to her guest and fixed her with her small, unkind eyes. Before leaving, Jeanette turned around once more. There was no longer any doubt in her mind that she would come back here again. I will take him. Please provide me with a list of the paperwork that needs to be gathered for the adoption, she said confidently to the director. Edwin stopped outside the house, walked quickly to the wicket, pressed the bell, but no one opened it for him. 9:30, I suppose. She's already gone, the visitor sighed. He had been slow to arrive early, and now he realized he was late. Okay, I'll be there by 8, the guest sighed. I'll get in the car and we'll discuss it with her on the spot. In the meantime, Jeanette was on her way home. She was madly happy. Of course, Jerome had a very serious illness, but he could talk normally. And as the mother realized, the child was a good thinker, so she was hopeful that something could be done for him. Suddenly, Jeanette thought of Daniel. She was floundering and didn't know how to tell him about his father. I'll ask Caleb to see him once in a while, she thought. Also, even though he may not want Jerome, I still have to tell him about him. Jeanette grabbed the phone and called her ex-husband. He didn't answer for a long time. Yes, came his disgruntled voice. Jeanette, I'm busy right now. What did you want? Caleb asked. We need to talk. It's an emergency. Can you meet me in a couple of hours? Can you? She asked. Okay, he replied without much enthusiasm. On the one hand, this was an opportunity for him to talk to her. On the other, the man really didn't want to tell her everything. Avoiding Daniel's alimony payments was the ultimate piggishness in his case. But for Valerie's sake, he'd have to do it. When Caleb saw no other option for him, Jeanette stopped by work. An hour to take care of business, she needed something to distract herself. The events of the last few days had been so emotional, the woman could barely stand it all. She took a few sips of hot tea, warmth spilling all over her body, closed her eyes. Jerome's face was in front of her. Her heart clenched tighter. "It's going to be okay, son," she whispered. A few tears fell into her mug. "I'm going to make it through this. I'll do everything I can to help." Jeanette sighed dreamily, glancing at her watch. She didn't want to be late for her meeting with her husband. They agreed to meet at a cafe. Jeanette had traveled to this meeting with great hope. Naturally, she wasn't thinking about getting Caleb back. In fact, the woman could hardly forgive his infidelity. She wanted her children to have a father. It didn't matter how his and her lives turned out in the future. The children should be able to see their father. Jeanette arrived at the cafe before the appointed time, sitting in the car with her eyes closed. She was very sleepy. The woman planned to spend no more than an hour talking to Caleb, and then she needed to pick up Daniel. She opened her eyes and noticed her ex-husband's car pull up. Startled, she looked in the mirror, lightly fixed her hand and hair, and walked into the cafe. Caleb was already sitting at the table, tapping his fingers nervously. "Hi," she smiled. "Jeanette, I'm not going to lecture you on how to live your life. You said yourself we're adults, didn't you?" "Jeanette, can we make this quick?" "I'm in a hurry," he said nervously, trying to think of an excuse. "I'm sorry, but I understand." "Caleb, I'll be honest if I tell you everything." The woman sighed deeply. "I found our son. His name is Jerome, and he looks a lot like you." The man froze nervously in his chair. He was starting to get pissed off by all these surprises with children. "Jeanette, I don't want to hear anything about him," he said coldly. The smile disappeared from his ex-wife's face. "Caleb, but he's your son, isn't he?" "He needs you," Jeanette said. "Daniel asks about you all the time, too. Why should children have to suffer through their parents' choices?" "Daniel is not my son," he squeezed out through gritted teeth. "And you know about that, Jeanette? I have a different family." "Caleb, wait." Her heart rolled frantically. "Are you saying you won't go out with our son?" "No," he replied succinctly. "Please don't bother me anymore. I'll be doing a DNA test. My wife is pregnant. It's not like I can go broke. We don't need your alimony." Caleb's ex-wife tried to reason with him. "Daniel loves you. He'll suffer." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I told you he's not my son." The man jumped up and headed for the exit. This was definitely not something Jeanette had expected from her ex-husband. She couldn't even figure out what to call it. "Is he completely out of his mind?" the woman whispered. "How can you play with people like that? He's a child, after all." All the way back, Jeanette tried to understand the motivation behind her husband's behavior, but she could think of nothing but madness. "I mean, he knows he's going to hurt Daniel badly," she reasoned. "After all, he's not a fool. How could he do such a thing deliberately?" Ideas began to pop into Jeanette's head about Valerie being Caleb's mistress. An inadequate person, she thought. It certainly didn't excuse her ex-husband, but dancing to the tune of such an idiot was too much. "Something tells me this fool will use the same methods against him," Jeanette sighed. "Caleb, you're a complete moron. You have 2 sons and you could keep in touch with them for the rest of your life and rely on their help. But you've destroyed your own future with your own hands. All for what? For some crazy mistress." She ached at the mere thought of how she would inform Daniel that his father didn't want to know him. She was also afraid the boy would find out he wasn't their kin. "Poor son," she cried again. "How can I protect you from all this?" Jeanette decided to take a few days to think about the best way to tell Daniel about their divorce. Plus, she needed to let him know he had a brother. "Some kind of horror," the woman whispered. "It's like I've been sucked into some kind of vortex and I can't get out of it. And the best part is that it's not my fault. Behind my back, Caleb was making the life he thought was best for him. He didn't care about her. Daniel, according to his mother, knew that Caleb was on a business trip. Secretly from his mother, he had called him several times today. But at first his father hadn't picked up, and then his son realized his number was blocked. "Mum, will Dad be back soon?" he said. "I miss him so much," and Daniel cried. "Son," Mum said tiredly, "the day will come and we'll talk about it. Let's not now." At home they had dinner. Neither of them was in the mood. It seemed to Jeanette that just when she had solved one problem, another immediately appeared. She tried to distract herself, while Daniel was playing, and then suddenly the bell rang. Jeanette stepped outside. "Edwin." "Hi," she tried to smile. "Didn't expect to see you." "Jeanette." "Let's talk," he said quietly. "I came to see you this morning. I wanted us to go together to look for Jerome." "I've already found him," she replied immediately. "Edwin, I'll be doing the paperwork on him. After the divorce, I'll pick him up." "And how is he?" the former doctor asked with interest. "Is he walking?" He looked intently into the woman's eyes. No, Jeanette shook her head negatively, "but he talks and moves his arms." "Jeanette, I want to help you." Edwin lowered his head. "After all, I am the one to blame for this whole affair." "Edwin, I don't blame you for anything," she reassured him. "Let's go inside and talk," Jeanette finally suggested. They sat in the kitchen. Edwin put forward his hypotheses, but without examining the boy, he could say nothing for certain. The principal described his diagnosis to me in general terms, Jeanette told him. She was so angry with me that she wouldn't let me see his papers. Right away, she started accusing me of taking him away and then bringing him back to them in a month. "That's not going to happen." "Is that what you told Caleb?" He looked at her intently. "I suppose he, as a father, should know about it." "Edwin," Caleb turned out to be. "I'm sorry, but I don't have any words. Not only does he not want to meet Jerome, he's even disowned Daniel. I don't know what's going on with him. He told me today that Daniel is not his son and he won't pay child support for him. After all these years of dealing with him. Plus, he was the one who initiated the child swapping the guest's side. I'm afraid Caleb doesn't realize what he's doing. Frankly, I don't care. The most important thing to me is that my children are healthy and happy," Jeanette replied. Edwin agreed with her that next time he would go to the orphanage with her together. He wanted to see the boy. The director was even more unhappy than the first time. She kept saying something to the guests. "You're wasting my time." And forcing the child to get used to you, she wasn't shy in her expressions. "I am a doctor," Edwin said coldly, staring intently into her eyes. "You're overstepping your authority, and I know where it needs to be reported." She quieted a little, taking her guests to Jerome. The boy was asleep. They had to wait about half an hour. "I wish I could at least take him today." Jeanette couldn't stand this pressure and cried. "Edwin, do you know how much it hurts?" The man walked over and put his arms around her. He really wanted Jeanette to finally be together with her child. He looked intently at Jerome, checked his body first, then touched him. To some points, the boy was unresponsive. Edwin stood and pondered. One of his hands touched the area at the back of his head. Edwin touched one unremarkable point, then pressed it with force, and one of the boy's hands twitched involuntarily. Then the former doctor began to work the entire spine. 2 more points were partially blocked. Edwin saw clearly as he pressed one of them with such force that one toe on the boy's foot trembled slightly. "Got it," he said cheerfully. "Jerome, did you feel anything?" The boy shook his head negatively, but it was enough for Edwin to see with his own eyes. "Jeanette, some chance we have," he smiled as they drove back home. "I don't know where this might lead, but I see it that way, a few courses. The treatment will probably drag on for a few years. I mean formal treatment. You need good medication and an individual program. I'm putting it together, need to work out the exercises, then incorporate the right points. I'll use everything. Maybe we'll get lucky." "Thank you, Edwin. I don't know what I'd do without you," Jeanette sighed. "Wouldn't lose your son," he replied sadly. "Jeanette, let me finalize this matter. the divorce went through. The former spouses settled their case without argument. Jeanette was fully immersed in the matter with Jerome. Mom Daniel came up to her one day. I saw him today. He was standing outside the school. Idiot, Jeanette scolded to herself. Why pick on a child like that? Daniel, son, I have something important to tell you. Her voice trembled. You see, it just so happens that Daddy met another woman. He has another family now. What about me? Cried the boy. Doesn't he love me anymore? He rushed tearfully to Jeanette. He loves you, of course, but the woman was just going mad. She didn't understand how to explain all this to the child. But he's very busy right now. He, his new wife, is about to have a baby girl. I'm having a sister. The boy's face brightened. Mom, will you take me to them? I'll play with her. Daniel cried. So did his mother. Son, it's not that simple. Forgive me, but you have a brother. Only he's sick. A brother? The boy couldn't understand what was going on, and a sister and a brother. Mom, is it true, son? Dad married an aunt who is expecting a child from another man. A thought came into her head. That's why you won't have a sister. You do have a brother, on the other hand. Why didn't you tell me anything about that? He asked her unhappily. I want to see him. Daniel, I didn't know about it myself, you know. The hospital didn't tell me that one son of mine was very sick and might not survive. They took Jerome away from me, and I found him only recently. His name is Jerome. Joy shone in the boy's eyes. Mom, I'm going to play with him. Son, he's sick. He can't walk, she finally told him. The son hesitated for a while. Nothing, he shouted. We'll put a box on the bed and collect the toys. Running, he went to his room to get the box. Jeanette covered her face with her hands and cried. A heavy weight fell from her shoulders. She realized that Daniel would miss his father very much, but she had hope that he would befriend her boy. Promise you'll take me to him right away, Daniel demanded. I'll take him my toys. I promise, kissed his mother. Will you be a good brother? I'm sure of it. Daniel didn't doubt her words. For 3 days he had been preparing for the meeting. There was already a bag standing in the corridor. Daniel, what is it? His mother asked in surprise before leaving the house. Presents from my brother, he replied proudly. I want to give Jerome his most favorite toys. Daniel's son, let's take them piece by piece. It's just that we might get scolded at the orphanage for bringing him so many at once. Okay, my son agreed and started pulling toys out of the bag to do an audit. Finally, he picked out a car, an aeroplane, a Lego house, and a board game. Daniel's mouth stayed open the whole way. He talked excitedly about how they would play with his brother, swim in the pool in the summer, watch cartoons. Jeanette smiled the whole way. She hadn't felt so happy in a long time. Jerome already knew that the woman who visited him all the time wanted to adopt him. She also told him that she had a son. The boy was very worried. He had always dreamed of having a family for as long as he could remember. And now that it had come true, he was very afraid. Rumor had it that even if people like him were taken in, they were soon brought back. Hey, brother, Daniel flew into the room. Jerome, look what I brought you, and he started pulling toys out of the bag. Jerome stared at the stranger in bewilderment. His heart nearly jumped out. Here it is, the race car. But Mom said you can't have the remote here, and Daniel's mouth didn't close. I know what's on it, no matter how much you squeeze the throttle. We have good tarmac in our yard, so we'll race together. After a few minutes, Jerome joined the conversation as well. His mother looked at them and cried with joy. God, thank you, she whispered. Now my boys will grow up together. They will be true friends. Finally, the day came when Jerome was taken home. At first, everything was unfamiliar to him. Right away, Edwin was involved with Jeanette. He had already made an appointment with a good doctor. He examined the boy and prescribed treatment. 2 days later, Jerome was already receiving drips at home. A week later, Edwin himself became involved. Daniel never took a step away from his brother. They did everything together. It was only during school that each of them studied separately. Daniel, as he was supposed to be, in class. Jerome had a teacher who came to his house. Daniel, it's so easy, his brother smiled when he complained that he couldn't do his homework. Bring it over here. I'll explain it to you. Half an hour later, Daniel had finished his maths at his brother's dictation. Don't tell Mum, of course, he asked. She'll scold me. You have my word, Jerome promised. You can count on me, he added maturely. 8 months passed. Daniel came running to his mother. His eyes nearly popped out of his orbits. Mum, Jerome couldn't get his words out. He grabbed her hand and ran into the nursery. Jeanette saw Jerome sitting up in bed. She shrieked in surprise. Mum, I can sit up, rejoiced her son. I can feel my back. I touched it with my hands. Jeanette immediately called Edwin. He examined the boy. It was a success, both conventional and unconventional medicine. Well, Jerome, you've done well. He laughed nervously. Even the former doctor did not expect such a thing. Such a thing should be celebrated. A carriage for us. He shouted at the top of his voice. Edwin went to a special shop and brought a wheelchair. Now Jerome could move around the house on his own. Hooray. Daniel ran around his brother. We did it. He tossed his hat in the air with joy. The treatment continued, and exactly 2 years after it began, Jerome was finally on his feet. Jeanette cried tears of joy. Daniel squealed with happiness. Edwin sat in a chair with his hands over his face. He was crying too. How much labor had been put in, God only knew. And not for a moment did either of them doubt that Jerome would get up. Of course, the boy was not completely cured. He had a limp, so he walked with a crutch all the time. But that didn't matter so much anymore. Let's go to the cafe, Daniel suggested. Mum, Uncle Edwin. Jerome and I love him so much. Let them see that my brother has started to walk. Of course, the boy couldn't carry such a heavy load yet, so the adults brought the wheelchair with them too. Jeanette sat looking at her children, then shifted her gaze to Edwin. How far had they traveled together? Thorny had been their journey. Their eyes met, the man staring at her intently. In those eyes, Jeanette read everything she had long known: his devotion, his love, his concern for her and her children. They returned home, the children went to bed in their room, and Jeanette and Edwin sat in the living room. Both were silent. I'm very happy for you, Jeanette, the guest broke the silence. He swallowed the lump in his throat. I don't want to lie. In these 2 years and more, you've become my family. I love you and the children. Edwin, we love you too, she smiled. I never thought I'd say this after Caleb left, but I love you too. You're calm and easy, even in the stormiest ocean. I don't know how to explain it. I've never met anyone like you. Jeanette, maybe the only thing that makes me different is that I'm willing to change, he said calmly. Otherwise, there's nothing special about me. A lot of people do spiritual practices and yoga. But for me, it's not a tool to prove my exceptionalism. I do it because I enjoy it. Caleb sat in the car. His mood was at zero. Valerie's situation was getting worse and worse every day. He had hoped she would be better after the baby was born. But on the contrary, her character had deteriorated many times over. His wife was always dissatisfied with something, then his workshop brought a small income. Then she threw jealous tantrums and accused him that he has some other. Caleb's parents didn't approve of his choice, especially after he told them that he wouldn't be hanging out with Daniel anymore. You're a fool. Caleb, his father, spat in his face. You've lost such a woman because of that woman, and you've lost your son. His parents had been talking to him through their teeth the whole time. His father told him at once that he had been with his. He swore harshly. He wouldn't live. I'm all alone, Caleb cried. What have I achieved? I betrayed everyone, and I thought no one would ever do that to me. Only now did Caleb realize that Valerie had done to him what he had done to Jeanette. She wouldn't let him take care of her daughter, always yelling that it was her baby. I can't take it anymore. He got out of the car and went home. Valerie was already waiting for him there with a complaint. Where were you? Like a mad woman, she shouted. Did you find yourself a younger woman? I'm with the baby, and you? She waved her hands in front of her husband. Valerie, I'm filing for divorce. I've had enough. You're unbearable. You're impossible to live with. Someone needs something other than me. You idiot. I'm the one who's put up with you for almost 4 years, Caleb said coldly. I don't care what you think. It's over. I'm leaving. Valerie called her husband the very last words. Naturally, she couldn't accept that it was her fault. She'd made up a legend about him, that he'd cheated on her. But Caleb didn't care anymore. He asked his parents for asylum. His mother persuaded his father, and he let him in. Valerie, of course, in this situation was not confused, requested a huge alimony for her daughter. In court, of course, she was not able to achieve the payment of alimony. Alimony ex-wife, as it was supposed to be according to the law. And Caleb had been living in a completely different part of town all this time. He moved his workshop away from his old home, so he and Jeanette never crossed paths. He never went downtown. He wasn't interested. His father had told him there were rumors that Jeanette had married Edwin. I've missed such a woman, he cursed. I never thought my son would turn out to be such a fool. It was a cool October day. Caleb decided to take a walk around the town. He was a free man now. He went into a small cafe and immediately heard loud laughter. He turned in the direction it was coming from. Jeanette was sitting at the table with the baby in her arms. Dad, order me another milkshake and Jerome a strawberry, he heard the teenager's voice. Caleb looked closer and recognized him as Daniel. The man immediately turned away and headed for the exit. He took one last look at the people he'd once loved. Edwin came to the table with a tray and set everything down. Then he took the baby boy in his arms. Jeanette kissed him. She looked happily at the two teenagers and laughed merrily. God, it hurts, Caleb whispered. I ruined my happiness with my own hands. I had everything, and now it's empty. He hurried to his car. He was sorry he'd ever given up on Daniel. Even if Jeanette had married, he would have had a son. And now Daniel was calling another man Daddy Edwin. Ricky, come here, Daniel called to his younger brother. Dad, give it to me, he asked his father. Daniel had once thought that a long time ago he had lost the most precious thing in his life, his family. He had never imagined that this loss would lead to the arrival of his best friend and brother, Jerome, and then a little brother, Ricky. And that one day he would call Edwin father and never regret it. Daniel held the baby in his arms and smiled contentedly. Jerome sat up next to him and began to play with his baby brother. The parents looked at them and rejoiced. Here it is, the long-awaited happiness.